Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Goofy Harry presenting to you today. If Narcissa Malfoy stole baby Harry from the Dursleys and raised him as Draco's twin brother in secret, show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1. The second son. The street was so aggressively ordinary that it made Narcissa Malfoy's skin crawl. She stood at the corner of Privet Drive beneath an elm tree that had been pruned into a shape so perfectly round it looked like a lollipop, her traveling cloak pulled tight against the November cold. Every house on the street was identical. Every lawn was trimmed to the same height. Every car in every driveway was washed and waxed and parked at precisely the same angle, as though the residents had held a meeting about it. Muggles, she shouldn't have been here. She should have been at the manor, asleep beside Lucius, with 14-month-old Draco snoring in the nursery down the hall. The war was over. The Dark Lord was gone, destroyed by a baby, of all the absurd things, and Lucius had spent the last 48 hours in frantic meetings at the ministry, laying the groundwork for his imperious defense. The smart move was to stay home, stay quiet, and let the chaos settle, but Narcissa had heard things. Overheard, really, Lucius talking to Severus through the flue late last night, their voices low and urgent. The Potter boy survived. Dumbledore has taken him somewhere. The whole order is celebrating. And then Severus, in a voice so hollow it barely sounded human, he left the child with Lily's Muggle sister. That was the part that had gotten under her skin, not the war's end, not the Dark Lord's fall, not even the political nightmare her family now faced. No, it was the image of Albus Dumbledore, the self-proclaimed greatest wizard of the age, taking a 15-month-old child and leaving it with Muggles. On a doorstep, in November, she told herself she was only going to look. Narcissa moved along the pavement, her heels silent under a muffling charm. Number 4 was halfway down the street on the left side. She'd pulled the address from Severus's memory of Lily's childhood with an ease that would have alarmed him if he'd known. The house was dark. A milk bottle sat on the front step beside a folded newspaper. And there, tucked between the bottle and the door, wrapped in a blanket that was far too thin for the temperature, was a baby. She stopped breathing. The child was asleep. His little fist was curled against his cheek, and his dark hair, nothing like Draco's white blonde wisps, stuck up in every direction. A letter had been pinned to the blanket. Pinned. Like a note to a school bag. Narcissa's fingers trembled as she crouched and read the first line of the envelope. Mr. and Mrs. V. Dursley, number 4, Privet Drive. A letter. He'd left a baby on a doorstep with a letter. She looked at the child's face. He shifted in his sleep and the blanket slipped, revealing the scar, that impossible lightning bolt wound, still raw and angry red, cutting across his tiny forehead. Harry Potter, the boy who lived. The child who had somehow destroyed the most powerful dark wizard in a century, left on a step like a parcel. Narcissa stood up. She should go home. This was insane. This was the most famous child in the wizarding world, and Dumbledore himself had placed him here, which meant there were protections, watchers, plans within plans. She should turn around, apparate home, pour herself a large glass of wine, and forget she'd ever come. The baby whimpered. It was a small sound, a cold sound. The sound of a child who had been lying on a stone step for hours in the freezing dark, whose parents had been murdered 2 days ago, and whose new guardians hadn't even bothered to open the door yet. Or perhaps didn't know, perhaps wouldn't check until morning, perhaps would find a frozen little body and a letter that explained nothing and everything. Narcissa picked him up. She didn't decide to. Her body simply moved, years of motherhood compressed into a single instinct that bypassed every rational thought in her head. The baby was cold, far too cold. She pressed him against her chest inside her cloak and felt his tiny heartbeat, rapid as a bird's, thudding against her collarbone. He made a muffled noise, nuzzled closer to the warmth, and went still. She stood on that absurd, immaculate street, holding someone else's child, and the full weight of what she was doing hit her like a bludgeon to the chest. If she put him back, he would grow up here, in this place, with people who didn't know him, didn't want him, would never understand what he was. She knew Petunia Dursley by reputation. Severus had spoken of Lily's sister exactly once, years ago, with a contempt that suggested deep personal experience. A woman who hated magic, who hated everything that Lily had been. And Dumbledore had chosen her to raise the child who had saved them all. If she took him, she was committing a crime so audacious that it circled past reckless into something almost elegant. She was stealing Harry Potter from under Albus Dumbledore's nose. She was taking the most hunted, most watched, most politically significant child in Britain and walking away with him in the dead of night. The baby's hand found her hair and gripped it. "Well," Narcissa whispered, "that settles it then." She disapparated. The crack of her departure echoed once along Privet Drive and then faded into silence. The milk bottle sat undisturbed on the step. The letter remained, pinned to nothing. When Petunia Dursley opened her door at 6:30 the next morning, she found the blanket, the letter, and an empty doorstep, and she spent the rest of her life believing that the whole thing had been some kind of bizarre prank. Albus Dumbledore would not discover the truth for almost a decade. Malfoy Manor was silent when she returned. Narcissa appeared in the entrance hall with the baby clutched against her chest and stood perfectly still for 10 seconds listening. The house elves were asleep. Lucius was in the master bedroom on the 3rd floor. She could feel the faint pulse of his presence through the manor's wards, steady and slow, sleeping. Good. She moved quickly through the darkened corridors, bypassing the grand staircase for the narrow servants' passage that led to the east wing. The nursery was here, Draco's nursery, warm and softly lit by a nightlight charmed to project tiny silver stars across the ceiling. She pushed open the door with her shoulder and crossed to the crib. Draco was asleep on his stomach, one arm flung out, his white blonde hair a mess. He was 14 months old and already looked like a miniature Lucius, sharp features, pale skin, that unmistakable Malfoy bone structure. Narcissa looked at him, then at the dark-haired baby in her arms. They looked nothing alike. That was a problem she could solve. She laid Harry on the changing table and he blinked awake, bright green eyes, vivid as killing curses, staring up at her with an eerie calm. Most babies his age would have been screaming. He just watched her, his tiny fist still gripping a strand of her blonde hair. "I need you to stay very quiet," she told him, fully aware that she was negotiating with an infant. "I'm going to do something that will feel strange, but I promise it won't hurt." She drew her wand, not the simple spells she used for household charms or social niceties. This was deep magic, black family magic. Narcissa had grown up in the House of Black, and whatever the world thought of her family, no one denied that they understood transformation at a level most wizards couldn't touch. Metamorph magic ran in the bloodline. Her cousin Nymphadora could change her face at will. Narcissa couldn't do that, but she knew the theory cold, and she knew the spells that could approximate it. The glamour she wove was not a simple appearance charm. Those faded, those could be detected. What Narcissa cast that night was closer to a blood adoption ritual spliced with a sustained metamorphic overlay, a spell so complex that she'd only ever read about it in the Black family grimoire locked in the vault beneath Grimmauld Place, which she'd copied into a private journal at age 16, because even then she'd understood that knowledge was the only power no one could take from you. It took 40 minutes. Harry didn't cry, not once. He watched her wand with those green eyes, tracking the movements with an intensity that was frankly unnerving for a child his age, and when the spell settled over him like a second skin, he simply blinked. His hair lightened, not to Draco's platinum, she wasn't stupid enough to make them identical, but to a dark ash blonde that could plausibly be explained by recessive genes. His features shifted subtly, his nose narrowing, his jawline sharpening just enough to echo the Malfoy profile. The famous scar faded from view, buried under layers of concealment so dense that even a targeted finite incantatum would only peel back the first layer. The eyes were the hardest part, green-like that didn't just vanish under a charm, it fought back as though the color itself was alive. She layered the glamour until they settled into a pale gray-blue, Malfoy enough to pass, and tried not to think about Lily Potter's eyes staring up at her from her stolen child's face. When she was finished, the baby on the table looked like he could be Draco's brother. Not a twin, not identical, but close enough in age and coloring that the story would hold. The story. She'd need one, a good one. Narcissa leaned against the wall and pressed her palms to her eyes. What had she done? She'd stolen Harry Potter. She'd committed what amounted to kidnapping, fraud, and about 17 violations of the International Statute of Secrecy. If anyone found out, if Dumbledore found out, if the Ministry found out, she and Lucius would spend the rest of their lives in Azkaban, and both children would be taken. Both children, because she had two now. She looked at the baby on the table and he looked back at her, and something in her chest locked into place with a click so definitive that she knew she would burn the world down before she let anyone take him. "Your name is Hadrian," she said softly. "Hadrian Regulus Malfoy. You're my son. You've always been my son. And no one is ever going to leave you on a doorstep again." The baby yawned, grabbed her finger, and fell asleep. Convincing Lucius was the performance of her life. She woke him at dawn with red-rimmed eyes and a story she'd rehearsed 12 times in the mirror. A secret pregnancy, not so unbelievable, given that she'd spent the last months of the war confined to the manor under enormous stress. A premature delivery aided by her personal house elf, Mippy, who had been sworn to silence. She'd been afraid that a second child during the war would be seen as weakness, that the Dark Lord might view another Malfoy heir as a liability or leverage. So she'd hidden him. And now that the war was over, now that it was safe, Lucius stared at her. Then he stared at the baby in her arms. "You're telling me," he said very slowly, "that you carried a child for 7 months, delivered him in secret, hid him from me, from the Dark Lord, and from every diagnostic spell in this house, and you're only telling me now?" "Yes, Narcissa. I was protecting him. I was protecting both of them." She let her voice crack. She didn't have to fake the trembling. She was running on no sleep and pure adrenaline, and the terror of this conversation was entirely real. "Lucius, if he had known, if he had decided to use our children against us." Something shifted behind Lucius's eyes. She saw the calculation happen in real time, the cost-benefit analysis that was always running behind that aristocratic face. A second heir, another Malfoy son. In the post-war political landscape, where alliances were everything and legacy was currency, a second son was an asset. And Narcissa was banking on the fact that Lucius Malfoy would never, in 1,000 years, voluntarily submit himself or his wife to a medical examination that might reveal the truth. Because that would mean admitting to the world that something in the Malfoy household was not as it appeared, and Lucius would sooner eat his own wand. He looked at the baby for a long time. The baby, Hadrian, she reminded herself, Hadrian, looked back with calm gray-blue eyes and an expression of regal disinterest that was, frankly, perfect casting. "He doesn't look much like Draco," Lucius said. "He looks like my side," Narcissa replied, which was a sentence so loaded with irony that she almost choked on it. Lucius reached out and touched the baby's hand. Hadrian grabbed his finger with the same stubborn grip he'd used on Narcissa's hair, and Lucius's expression did something complicated. "Hadrian," he said, testing the name. "Hadrian Regulus, after my cousin." Lucius nodded slowly. "We'll need to file birth records with the ministry, backdated. I can manage that. Fudge owes me enough favors to fill a Quidditch pitch." He paused. "He's small. He was premature. He'll grow," and that was it. Lucius Malfoy accepted a stolen child into his family with the same brisk pragmatism he applied to acquiring rare dark artifacts. Verify the value, secure the provenance paperwork, and don't ask too many questions about where it came from. Whether he truly believed Narcissa's story, she never knew. She suspected not. Lucius was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. But he never asked. Not that day, not in the 10 years that followed. He simply added a second crib to the nursery, filed the backdated birth certificate through 3 different ministry contacts, and introduced Hadrian Regulus Malfoy to Wizarding Society at the next social gathering as though the boy had been there all along. And the world believed it, because why wouldn't they? The Malfoys were one of the most prominent pureblood families in Britain. Their word was, for all practical purposes, law. If Narcissa Malfoy said she'd had twins, then she'd had twins, and anyone who suggested otherwise would find themselves on the wrong end of Lucius's considerable social and legal machinery. The lie held. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the lie held. 10 years later. "Harry, if you blow up one more garden gnome, your father's going to lose his mind." Hadrian Malfoy, Harry, to everyone who knew him well, which was a very short list, lowered his hand and grinned at his mother from across the manor's south lawn. The remains of the gnome were still smoking faintly. He hadn't used a wand. He was 10 years old. He didn't own a wand yet. "It bit me first," he said. "They bite everyone. That's what gnomes do." Narcissa set down her teacup and fixed him with a look that would have wilted most adults. Harry was immune. He'd been receiving that look since he could walk, and it had long since lost its power over him. Draco emerged from behind the topiary hedge, his white blonde hair immaculate despite the fact that he'd been crawling through the garden for the last 20 minutes. He looked at the gnome crater, then at Harry, then at the scorch marks on Harry's fingertips. "You did it again," Draco said, not accusatory, impressed. Jealous maybe, but only in the small, fleeting way that passed between them like weather. Didn't mean to, it just sort of. Harry flexed his fingers. Happened. It happened a lot. That was the thing about Harry that made Narcissa's heart race and her stomach clench simultaneously. His magic didn't behave like Draco's. Draco's accidental magic was neat, contained, predictable, a levitated toy here, a slammed door there, standard stuff. Harry's accidental magic was a force of nature. At age 4, he'd shattered every window on the ground floor of the manor during a tantrum. At 6, he'd levitated himself onto the roof and couldn't get down. At 8, he'd turned Lucius's prized peacocks bright orange for 3 days because he thought they looked boring. Lucius had not been amused. Lucius was rarely amused by Harry, though he hid it well. There was something about his second son that unsettled him, a wrongness he couldn't name and therefore couldn't address, which for a man like Lucius Malfoy was its own form of torture. Harry was too powerful, too wild, too instinctive. Draco was a Malfoy to the bone. He studied, he strategized, he played social chess with the pureblood children at every gathering. Harry just did things, terrifying, impressive, unexplainable things. "Come inside, both of you," Narcissa called. "We're going to Diagon Alley tomorrow, and you both need to look presentable." "We always look presentable," Draco said, with the supreme confidence of a boy who had never once in his life worn a wrinkled shirt. "Your brother looks like he's been wrestling blast-ended scroots." Harry looked down at himself. His trousers were grass-stained, his shirt was untucked, and there was what appeared to be gnome blood on his left sleeve. He shrugged. Narcissa shook her head. Two sons, identical in almost no way. She loved them both so fiercely that it sometimes felt like her chest couldn't contain it, a physical pressure behind her ribs that made her breath catch. Draco, who was hers by blood, Harry, who was hers by choice. And neither of them knew the difference. She pressed her hand against the teacup, feeling the heat, and reminded herself for the 10,000th time that she'd made the right decision. The alternative had been a doorstep, a cold, dark doorstep on a Muggle street. She'd made the right decision. Dinner at Malfoy Manor was a formal affair, even when the family was alone. The dining room seated 40, but they used one end of the long table, the four of them arranged in a configuration that hadn't changed in years. Lucius at the head, Narcissa to his right, Draco and Harry across from each other. Silver candlesticks, bone china. Crystal goblets filled with pumpkin juice for the boys and elf-made wine for the adults. "Tomorrow," Lucius said, cutting his venison with surgical precision, "you will receive your wands. This is the single most important day of a young wizard's life." "More important than sorting?" Harry asked. "The sorting is a formality. Every Malfoy has been in Slytherin for 7 generations. Your wand chooses you based on who you are, not which chair a hat puts you in." "What if the hat puts us somewhere else?" Draco laughed. Harry didn't. He was looking at his father with that particular expression, head slightly tilted, gray-blue eyes sharp, that always made Lucius grip his fork a little tighter. There was no malice in it. Harry was simply the kind of child who asked questions that shouldn't have occurred to a 10-year-old. "It won't," Lucius said with a finality that closed the subject. Harry let it drop, but Narcissa caught the flicker of something across his face, not rebellion exactly, more like a mental note filed away for later examination. Harry filed a lot of mental notes. It was one of the things that made him dangerous, though he didn't know it yet. "I want a dragon heartstring core," Draco announced, "like father's. The wand chooses the wizard Draco, not the other way around." "Then I want the wand to choose dragon heartstring," Harry snorted. Draco kicked him under the table. Harry kicked back. Narcissa gave them both a look that halted the escalation. "What core do you want?" Draco asked Harry once the undertable warfare had ceased. Harry considered this. "I don't know, something that feels right, I suppose." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one." Draco rolled his eyes and they fell into their usual rhythm, Draco talking, Harry listening, Draco planning, Harry improvising. They were not identical in personality any more than they were in appearance, but they moved through the world like two halves of a single mechanism, each compensating for what the other lacked. Draco was the voice. Harry was the engine. Together they were formidable, and they were only 10 years old. Narcissa watched them and felt that familiar pressure behind her ribs. After dinner, she found Lucius in his study. He was reading the Daily Prophet, the 10th anniversary retrospective on the fall of the Dark Lord, complete with speculation about the whereabouts of Harry Potter. "The boy who lived, where is he now?" The headline made her stomach drop, as it did every year. She controlled her face, poured herself a drink from the sideboard, and sat in the chair opposite his desk. "Still milking that story," Lucius muttered. 10 years and they haven't found the boy. Either Dumbledore has him hidden under a Fidelius or he's dead," said Narcissa. "The old fool gives that same statement every year. Harry Potter is safe and well. If that were true, someone would have seen him. A wizard that famous doesn't simply vanish." Lucius folded the paper. "I suspect the boy died that night. The killing curse didn't bounce, it killed them both, and Dumbledore invented the survival story to give the public a symbol. That's quite a theory. It's the logical one." He looked at her. "You don't agree?" "I think Dumbledore is many things, but he's not a liar on that scale." Lucius raised an eyebrow. "You give him too much credit." Narcissa sipped her wine and said nothing. This conversation happened in some form every October when the anniversary coverage restarted, and she'd become expert at navigating it. Agree too readily with the Potter is dead theory, and Lucius might wonder why she was so eager to close the topic. Push back too hard and he might wonder why she cared. The middle ground was a narrow ledge, and she walked it with the precision of a woman who had been balancing on it for a decade. The boys are excited about tomorrow, she said, changing the subject. As they should be. Hadrian's magic has been active lately. Lucius set down the paper. I noticed the gnome incident, among other things. He levitated the entire breakfast table this morning. Plates, food, everything, for 30 seconds. Accidental magic at his age. It's not accidental, Lucius. He does it deliberately. He just can't control the scale. A silence settled between them. This was the unspoken territory, the place where Lucius's willful ignorance and Narcissa's desperate secrecy overlapped. Hadrian's power was abnormal. They both knew it. Lucius attributed it to the Black bloodline, which was famous for producing magically volatile children, and Narcissa let him believe that because the alternative was unthinkable. He'll learn control at Hogwarts, Lucius said. That's what the school is for. And if he doesn't, then I'll hire private tutors. He's a Malfoy. He'll master it. Narcissa nodded and finished her wine and excused herself. She walked upstairs, checked on both boys, Draco asleep, Harry reading a book on advanced hexes by wandlight that he'd stolen from Lucius's restricted shelf, confiscated the book, kissed Harry's forehead, and went to her own room. She locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed her hands together until they stopped shaking. Tomorrow was Diagon Alley, Ollivanders, the wand fitting. She'd been dreading this for years because wands didn't lie. Wands didn't care about glamours or cover stories or backdated birth certificates. A wand chose based on the wizard's magical core, and Harry's magical core was not a Malfoy's. She would handle it. She always handled it, but the hands kept shaking for a long time. Diagon Alley was packed. The start of the Hogwarts school year always drew crowds, but this year felt particularly manic. Families swarmed Flourish and Blots. Children pressed their faces against quality Quidditch supplies. A knot of witches argued loudly outside Madame Malkin's about hemlines. The Malfoys moved through the crowd like a blade through silk. Lucius led, his walking stick clicking against the cobblestones, the silver serpent head catching the light. Narcissa walked beside him, immaculate in dove-gray robes, and behind them, shoulder to shoulder, came the twins. They drew stares. They always drew stares. The Malfoy family was famous, and the Malfoy twins were the kind of famous that generated whispers. Two boys, nearly the same height, moving in unconscious synchronization, their pale hair catching the sun. Draco acknowledged the attention with a practiced, aristocratic awareness. Harry ignored it completely. Wands first, Lucius decided. Ollivanders was narrow and dim and smelled like dust and old magic. Bell above the door chimed as they entered, and a moment later the old wandmaker materialized from the shadows between the shelves like a particularly unsettling ghost. Ah, said Ollivander, the Malfoys, Mr. Ollivander. Lucius's tone was polite and cold. My sons require wands. Ollivander's pale eyes, enormous and unblinking like a deep-sea fish, moved from Lucius to Narcissa to Draco to Harry. They lingered on Harry. Narcissa felt her pulse spike. Twins, Ollivander murmured. How delightful. Which of you would like to go first? Me, said Draco, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who'd been stepping forward first his entire life. Harry let him. He always did. It wasn't deference, it was strategy. Harry liked to watch, to learn from other people's experiences before having his own. Narcissa had once overheard him tell Draco at age 7, you go first because you're braver, I go second because I'm smarter. Draco had thrown a pillow at him. The fitting for Draco was efficient and unremarkable. Ollivander moved through a dozen wands before settling on hawthorn and unicorn hair, 10 inches, reasonably springy. Draco gave it a wave, and a shower of green and silver sparks erupted from the tip. He looked pleased. Excellent, Ollivander said, though his attention had already shifted. And now the other twin. Harry stepped forward. Ollivander studied him with an intensity that bordered on invasive, and Narcissa had to resist the urge to step between them. Hold out your wand arm. Harry extended his right hand. A measuring tape flew off the counter and began taking measurements, arm length, finger span, wrist circumference, while Ollivander disappeared into the stacks. He returned with a long black box. Try this. Elman Dragon Heartstring, 11 inches. Harry took the wand and waved it. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing, no sparks, no warmth, no reaction at all. The wand was inert in his hand, as though it were a stick picked up off the ground. No, number, Ollivander plucked it away. Not that, let's see. Ash and Phoenix Feather, dead again, then Maple and Unicorn Hair, dead, Yew and Dragon Heartstring, a single red spark, quickly extinguished. Ebony and Phoenix Feather, nothing. Vine and Dragon Heartstring, the wand actually recoiled from Harry's grip, clattering to the floor. Lucius shifted behind them. Narcissa could feel his impatience like heat from a furnace. Draco was watching with wide eyes. Ollivander, by contrast, was becoming more animated with each failure, his eyes brighter, his movements quicker, as though Harry's resistance was the most exciting thing that had happened to him in years. Tricky customer, he breathed. Oh, very tricky. The magical signature is unusual. He paused, staring at Harry with those lamp-like eyes. Wait here. He vanished into the back of the shop. They heard shuffling, the creak of old wood, the sound of boxes being moved. When he returned, he was carrying a single dusty box with an expression that Narcissa recognized with a lurch of dread, the look of a man who has just had a theory confirmed. Holly and phoenix feather, Ollivander said softly. 11 inches, nice and supple. Harry took the wand. The effect was immediate. The shop filled with warmth, as though someone had thrown open a curtain on a summer day. Golden sparks erupted from the wand's tip, not a shower but a torrent, cascading upward, swirling around Harry like a living thing. His hair ruffled in a wind that existed only around him. The boxes on the shelves rattled, the lights flickered. Harry stood at the center of it, perfectly still, his face lit from below by golden light, and he was smiling, not the guarded half-smile he usually wore, but a real one, open and fierce and wild. Oh, he said, that's the one. The light faded. The shop settled. Ollivander was staring at Harry with an expression that made Narcissa want to obliviate him on the spot. Curious, the old man whispered. Very curious. What's curious? Harry asked. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Malfoy, every single one. The phoenix whose tail feather resides in your wand gave another feather, just one other. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, his eyes flickered to the scar that wasn't visible, to the forehead that showed nothing but smooth, glamored skin. Its brother gave you that scar. The shop went silent. Narcissa's heart stopped. She was certain of it. Her heart physically stopped beating for a full second, and when it restarted, it was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. But Harry just frowned. Scar? I don't have a scar. Ollivander blinked, his head tilted, bird-like. He looked at Harry, really looked at him, and Narcissa saw the exact moment that doubt replaced certainty. The boy in front of him was ash-blonde, gray-eyed, clearly a Malfoy. The glamour was 10 years deep, layered and reinforced and woven into Harry's very skin. Whatever Ollivander had seen, whatever the wand had told him, it didn't match the face. Forgive me, Ollivander said slowly. I misspoke. The wand's brother belongs to he who must not be named. I merely meant that the connection is unusual for a young wizard of your background. The Dark Lord's wand, Harry said. No fear, no reverence, just flat recognition. That's interesting. Harry, Narcissa's voice was calm, controlled, and carried an unmistakable command. Stop talking. We should pay and move on. We have other shops to visit. Harry looked at her. She saw the question forming behind his eyes. She always saw it, that relentless curiosity that no amount of Malfoy training could suppress, and she watched him decide consciously to let it go. For now, 7 galleons, Ollivander said, still staring at Harry as Narcissa placed the coins on the counter. She met his gaze and held it. 2 adults looking at each other over a counter, and in that look was an entire conversation that neither of them would ever acknowledge aloud. You suspect something, her eyes said. If you value the continued existence of your shop, your reputation, and your kneecaps, you will keep your suspicions to yourself. Ollivander looked away first. They left the shop. The sunlight hit Narcissa's face, and she inhaled the warm, busy air of Diagon Alley and felt like she was going to be sick. That was weird, Draco said. He said you have you-know-who's brother wand. Twin core, Harry corrected. Same phoenix, different feathers. That's mental. It's a coincidence. Is it, though, boys? Lucius's voice cut the conversation short. We have uniforms to buy. They moved on. Madame Malkin's, Flourish and Blots, the apothecary. The day resumed its expected shape. Draco chattered, Lucius networked. Harry carried his bags in silence, the holly wand tucked inside his robes, his fingers brushing the handle every few minutes as though reassuring himself it was real. Narcissa walked beside them and smiled and nodded and said the right things to the right people, and inside her skull a single thought hammered over and over like a heartbeat. He knows. Ollivander knows, or suspects, or will figure it out. The wand chose Harry Potter's wand, and Ollivander remembers every wand he's ever sold, and the only reason it didn't unravel right there in the shop is because my glamour is better than his eyes. She needed to talk to Severus. Tonight. The flu call happened at midnight, after the boys were asleep and Lucius had retired to his study with a bottle of Ogden's and a stack of ministry correspondence. Narcissa knelt before the fireplace in her private sitting room and threw in the powder. Severus Snape's quarters, Hogwarts. His face appeared in the flames, sallow and irritable. It's midnight, Narcissa. Ollivander nearly exposed him today. The irritation vanished. Severus's face went perfectly still, the dangerous kind of still, the kind that meant every ounce of his considerable intelligence had just snapped to full alert. Explain, she told him, the wand selection, the twin core, Ollivander's comment about the scar. She watched Severus's expression shift incrementally as the implications sank in, from concern to calculation to something that looked almost like pain. Severus Snape was the only other person in the world who knew what Hadrian Malfoy really was. He'd figured it out within the first year, not because Narcissa told him, but because Severus had spent half his life staring at Lily Evans's face, and no glamour in existence could fully suppress the way Harry's magic felt. He'd confronted Narcissa at a dinner party, backed her into a private room, and demanded the truth with a ferocity that had genuinely frightened her. She'd told him, not everything, not the doorstep, not the impulse, but enough. And Severus, after a very long silence, had agreed to keep the secret, not for Narcissa, not for Lucius, not even for the boy, for Lily. Because the alternative, Dumbledore's alternative, had been a muggle cupboard in a family that would have hated everything Lily's son was, and Severus Snape would burn beside Narcissa before he let that happen. The twin core is a problem, he said now. Dumbledore knows which wand belongs to whom. If Ollivander reports this, he won't. I made myself clear. You threatened an old man in his own shop. I looked at him, Severus, that was sufficient. A pause. The Dark Lord's brother wand, of all the wands in that shop, it chose him decisively. Because he is who he is, the wand sees past the glamour, it reads the magical core, not the face. Severus's dark eyes bored into hers through the flames. This will happen again, the wand will attract attention. Dumbledore has been searching for Potter for 10 years, every instrument he owns went dark the night you took the boy. He'll be watching every student who enters Hogwarts this year looking for the one he lost. I know, do you? Because if Dumbledore discovers the truth, it won't be a polite conversation. He will take the boy, he will dismantle your family. He will do it with a smile and a lemon drop and the absolute conviction that he is right, because Albus Dumbledore has never once in his life considered the possibility that he might be wrong. I know, Severus. Then what is your plan? Narcissa stared into the fire. My plan is the same as it has always been. The glamour holds, the story holds. Harry goes to Hogwarts as Hadrian Malfoy, sits in your house, and becomes a wizard. He does not need to be Harry Potter. He does not need to be the boy who lived. He needs to be my son. And when the glamour cracks, because it will, Narcissa, the more powerful he becomes, the harder it will be to contain. His magic is already, Severus stopped himself. Already what? Remarkable. The word sounded like it cost him something. I reviewed the reports from his tutors: wandless levitation at age 4, instinctive transfiguration at 6, untrained elemental manipulation at 8. He is, by every measurable standard, one of the most magically gifted children to enter Hogwarts in decades, and that power has a signature, Narcissa. A signature that does not match the Malfoy bloodline, or the Black bloodline, or any bloodline your cover story accounts for. The glamour covers the signature, it mutes it, it does not eliminate it. And if the boy experiences a sufficiently powerful emotional event, grief, rage, fear, the glamour will fail, not permanently but long enough for someone watching to see, and Dumbledore is always watching. Narcissa pressed her forehead against the cool stone of the mantelpiece. What would you have me do, Severus? Tell him he's 11. I would have you prepare for the day when my name is Hadrian Malfoy stops being enough. Because that day is coming, Narcissa, and when it arrives, the boy deserves better than to be blindsided. The fire crackled. Narcissa said nothing for a long time. Watch him, she said finally, at Hogwarts. Watch him as you've never watched anything in your life. If the glamour flickers, you contain it. If Dumbledore gets too close, you redirect him. And if her voice faltered just once. If Harry starts asking questions you can't deflect, you come to me, not Lucius, not Dumbledore, me. Understood? And Severus, yes, he's a good boy. Whatever you see when you look at him, whoever's eyes you're searching for behind that glamour, he's a good boy. Don't forget that. The fire hissed. Severus's face was unreadable. I'll do my best, he said, and the connection cut. Narcissa remained kneeling by the fireplace for a long time. Somewhere above her, 2 11-year-old boys slept in rooms across the hall from each other. One who was exactly who the world believed him to be, and one who was something the world wasn't ready for. Tomorrow would bring Hogwarts and everything she feared, but tonight they were hers, both of them her sons. She stood, straightened her robes, and went upstairs to check on them one more time. The morning of September the 1st dawned gray and cool, and Malfoy Manor descended into the specific chaos that only arises when 2 11-year-old boys are trying to pack for boarding school. Have you seen my advanced potions set? Draco yelled from his room. It's in my trunk, Harry yelled back. Why is it in your trunk? Because I'm going to need it more than you are. That is a lie, Hadrian, and you know it. Boys, Narcissa's voice carried up the staircase with the precision of a well-aimed hex. If you are not downstairs in 10 minutes with your trunks packed, I will pack for you, and I promise you will not enjoy my selections. They were downstairs in 8 minutes, trunks loaded. Owls caged, Draco's eagle owl Artemis, hooting with displeasure, and Harry's midnight black screech owl, Mordred, radiating calm indifference. Both boys were dressed in pressed trousers and dark traveling cloaks, their hair combed, Draco's slicked back. Harry's merely wrestled into temporary submission, their new wands holstered at their sides. They looked, Narcissa thought with a fierce, aching pride, like exactly what they were, the sons of one of the most powerful families in wizarding Britain, ready for anything. Lucius appeared in the entrance hall, walking stick in hand, silver serpent head gleaming. He looked at his sons, and something passed across his face, brief, warm, almost immediately suppressed. Lucius Malfoy did not do sentiment, but occasionally, in unguarded moments, sentiment did him. "The car is ready," he said. "We're taking the ministry vehicle. I have appearances to maintain." The enchanted car was a sleek black affair that looked like a limousine on the outside and a small apartment on the inside. They glided through the English countryside in leather-seated comfort, the boys pressing their faces to the window, and arrived at King's Cross with 40 minutes to spare. Platform 9 3/4 was bedlam. Students and parents milled between the pillars of smoke from the Hogwarts Express, loading trunks, shouting goodbyes, chasing escaped animals. Narcissa kept a hand on each boy's shoulder as they navigated the crowd, her grip a fraction tighter than necessary. "Remember," Lucius said, stopping them beside the train, "you are Malfoys, that means something. You do not beg, you do not grovel, and you do not lower yourselves. You lead. Is that clear?" "Yes, father," said Draco. "Yes, father," said Harry, with the barest flicker of something in his eyes that might have been irony or might have been genuine agreement. With Harry it was always hard to tell. Lucius nodded. He shook each boy's hand, firm, formal, exactly the way he'd shaken the hands of ministry officials and foreign dignitaries, and stepped back. Narcissa crouched in front of them. This was the moment she'd been dreading for months, the moment she had to let go. Let them walk onto a train, ride to a castle full of people who might see through her 11-year deception, and trust that the careful architecture of lies she'd built would hold. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low enough that only they could hear. "Both of you, you are brothers. Whatever happens at Hogwarts, whatever anyone says to you, whatever you discover, whatever surprises the world throws at you, you have each other. Do you understand?" "Mum, we're going to school, not war," Draco said. "Answer me." "We understand," Harry said quietly. He was watching her face with that unsettling perception she'd never been able to train out of him. "Mum, we'll be fine." She kissed them both on the forehead. Draco endured it with the pain tolerance of a boy who considered himself too old for public affection. Harry leaned into it just slightly, the way he always did, that tiny, unconscious seeking of warmth that had never left him since the night she'd picked him up off a cold stone step. "Go," she said, "and write to me." They boarded the train. She watched them go, two boys silhouetted against the window of a compartment, one blonde head and one slightly darker, already arguing about something as they shoved their trunks onto the overhead rack. The whistle blew. The train began to move. Narcissa stood on the platform and watched until it disappeared around the bend, the smoke trailing behind it like a gray ribbon unraveling against the sky. Lucius put a hand on her shoulder. "They'll be fine. I know. Draco will thrive." "And Hadrian," he paused, "Hadrian will be watched." Narcissa looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that our second son is unusual, Narcissa. His power, his temperament, the way he carries himself, people will notice. Dumbledore will notice. I've made arrangements with Severus to keep an eye on both of them, but particularly on Hadrian." "What kind of arrangements?" Lucius's hand tightened briefly on her shoulder. "The kind that ensure our family's secrets remain our family's secrets." He walked away toward the car. Narcissa stayed on the platform, watching the empty tracks, and wondered, not for the first time, exactly how much Lucius Malfoy knew, and how much he had simply chosen not to say. The platform cleared, the smoke dissipated. Somewhere in the English countryside, a train carried her sons toward the place where everything would either hold together or fall apart. Narcissa Malfoy turned on her heel, walked through the barrier into King's Cross, and began making contingency plans. She was very good at contingency plans. She'd had 10 years of practice. On the train, Harry pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the compartment window and watched the countryside blur past. Fields, hedgerows, a river glinting silver. He could feel the holly wand in his pocket, a warm, steady pulse, like a second heartbeat, and he found himself matching his breathing to its rhythm. "You're being weird," Draco said from the opposite seat, where he was flipping through a copy of Which Broomstick with practiced boredom. "I'm thinking." "You're always thinking. It's exhausting." Harry smiled. Draco wasn't wrong. Harry's mind never stopped. It turned things over, examined them from every angle, filed them away for later. Right now it was chewing on Ollivander's words. Its brother gave you that scar. He didn't have a scar. The old man had clearly misspoken, confused him with someone else, with Potter, presumably, the vanished hero everyone was still obsessing over. And yet, the wand had chosen him so decisively, like it had been waiting. Like it had known him before he'd walked through the door. And the twin core, the brother of the Dark Lord's wand, sitting in his pocket, humming against his thigh, that wasn't nothing. That was specific. That was strange. Do you ever feel like something's off? Harry asked. Draco looked up. Off how? I don't know, like there's a piece missing, something you should know but don't. Draco considered this with genuine seriousness because beneath the performative arrogance he always took Harry seriously. No, he said. But I'm not the one who blows up gnomes with his bare hands, so my frame of reference might be different. Harry laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that only Draco could pull out of him, and the heaviness in his chest eased. We're going to be brilliant at Hogwarts, Draco said with absolute conviction. You and me, the Malfoy twins, they won't know what hit them. Slytherin's not going to know what to do with us. Slytherin is going to worship us. The compartment door slid open. A round-faced boy with a toad clutched in both hands blinked at them. Sorry, have you seen a— Oh, never mind, I found him. He looked at their robes, their bearing, the casual entitlement that radiated from every surface. You're Malfoys. Astute, said Draco. I'm Neville Longbottom. Harry watched Draco's lip curl, the automatic pureblood sneer, calibrated for maximum social damage, and spoke before his brother could. Nice to meet you, Neville. I'm Harry. This is Draco. Draco shot him a look. Harry ignored it. He'd learned early that Draco's instinct was to cut people down and his own was to size them up, and his instinct was usually more useful. Longbottom, Draco said, managing to make the name sound like a mild digestive complaint. Neville swallowed, muttered something about finding a seat, and retreated. Harry watched him go. You could try being less of a prat, he told Draco. I could, but then I wouldn't be me. That's not the argument you think it is. Draco threw his magazine at Harry's head. Harry caught it without looking, plucked it out of the air with a reflex so fast and precise that it didn't look human. They both froze for a half-second because that wasn't normal reflexes. That was magic-enhanced instinct, the kind of thing that shouldn't manifest until years of trained dueling practice. Show off, Draco muttered, but his eyes were wide. Harry tucked the magazine behind him and said nothing. The wand in his pocket pulsed warmly, as if in approval. The train rolled on. Scotland rose in the windows, dark hills, deep valleys, the first suggestion of towers in the distance. Harry pressed his forehead back against the glass and felt the future rushing toward him, vast and unknown and thrumming with possibility. He was Harry Malfoy. He was going to Hogwarts. He was going to be extraordinary. He didn't know the half of it. Chapter 2, Sorting Secrets. The Hogwarts Express groaned to a halt at Hogsmeade Station, and Harry felt the shift before he saw it, a heaviness in the air, like walking into a room where old magic had soaked into the walls for centuries. He stepped off the train into the cool September night and looked up at the castle on the hill, and his breath caught. Hogwarts was alive, not metaphorically. Not in the way people said old buildings had character. Harry could feel it, a vast, slow, ancient awareness pressing against his skin like warm water. The castle knew he was there, it was looking at him. And somewhere in the deepest part of his magical core, something looked back and said yes. Furs years over here. The voice belonged to the largest man Harry had ever seen, a wild-haired giant holding a lantern that looked like a candle in his massive fist. Hagrid. Harry knew the name from his father's dismissive references, the half-breed groundskeeper, barely qualified to tend the garden. But the man's face was kind, his eyes bright and warm in the lamplight, and Harry found himself oddly reluctant to judge him on Lucius Malfoy's scale. Boats, Draco said beside him, eyeing the fleet of tiny vessels bobbing on the Black Lake. They're making us cross in boats. It's tradition. It's barbaric. We could have taken carriages like civilized people. Get in the boat, Draco. They climbed in. 2 other first-years joined them, a dark-skinned boy with high cheekbones and an air of quiet self-possession who introduced himself as Blaise Zabini, and a girl with a hard, flat stare and dark hair cut in a sharp bob. Pansy Parkinson. Harry knew both names from the pureblood social circuit, years of garden parties and formal dinners where children were displayed like prize horses and expected to perform accordingly. Malfoy twins, Pansy said, settling into the boat with practiced poise. Finally, Draco, you look exactly like your father. Thank you, it wasn't a compliment. She looked at Harry. You don't. I look like my mother's side, Harry said, the rehearsed answer smooth as water. He'd said it 1,000 times. It never got easier. The boats launched themselves across the lake. The castle grew larger with every stroke, its towers and turrets resolving from shadow into stone, lit from within by 1,000 windows that burned like golden eyes. Harry felt the magic intensify as they drew closer, layer upon layer of enchantment, ancient wards, and something else, something deeper than spells. The castle's own awareness, vast and patient and curious. His wand buzzed in his pocket. The hollywood was warm against his leg, almost vibrating, and he pressed his hand against it to still the movement. Something about Hogwarts was waking up parts of him that had been sleeping, and the sensation was dizzying. They docked, they climbed. A stern-faced witch in emerald robes met them at the top of a staircase and introduced herself as Professor McGonagall, and Harry liked her immediately, the no-nonsense set of her jaw, the way she looked at them like they were problems to be solved rather than children to be coddled. "The sorting ceremony will begin momentarily," she said. "You will enter the Great Hall, and when your name is called you will sit on the stool and place the sorting hat on your head. The hat will determine your house." She left them in an antechamber. The first years milled nervously. Someone's toad escaped again. Longbottom, predictably, and a bushy-haired girl with enormous front teeth was reciting Hogwarts history under her breath with the frantic energy of someone who'd memorized the entire textbook and was terrified it wouldn't be enough. "Granger, Hermione," she told anyone who'd listen. "My parents are dentists. I'm Muggle-born." Harry watched Draco's face tighten at the word Muggle-born. He watched the sneer form. He stepped on Draco's foot. "Ow, don't." "I wasn't going to, you were, don't." Draco glared at him but kept his mouth shut. This was old territory between them. Lucius had raised them on pure-blood ideology like mother's milk, the superiority of magical blood, the contamination of Muggle influence, the natural hierarchy of wizarding society. Draco had absorbed it like a sponge. Harry had absorbed it, examined it, and found it wanting, not because he was noble or enlightened or morally superior. Harry simply didn't believe in anything he couldn't verify, and he'd never seen evidence that blood status correlated with magical ability. His own power, whatever its source, didn't feel like something that came from a family tree. It felt wild, untamed, like it belonged to him and him alone, regardless of whose name he carried. He'd never said this to Lucius. He wasn't suicidal. The doors opened. McGonagall led them into the Great Hall, and Harry's first thought was that the ceiling was showing off. A perfect replica of the night sky arced overhead, stars glittering against velvet black, candles floating beneath it like earthbound constellations. 4 long tables stretched the length of the hall, packed with students. At the far end, a raised platform held the staff table, and behind it, Dumbledore. Harry recognized him from photographs. The long silver beard, the half-moon spectacles, the robes that looked like someone had raided a curtained shop during a fever dream. But photographs hadn't prepared him for the weight of the man's presence. Dumbledore sat in a golden chair at the center of the staff table, and even at this distance, even sitting perfectly still, he radiated an authority so absolute that it bent the air around him. Harry's wand pulsed hard. Once, like a warning, he filed it away. A 3-legged stool sat at the front of the hall with an ancient, battered hat perched on top of it. The hat twitched, a rip near the brim opened like a mouth, and it began to sing. Harry didn't listen to the song. He was scanning the staff table, cataloging faces. A tiny wizard who had to sit on a stack of books, Flitwick, Charms, Half-Goblin. A witch with wild curly hair and earth-stained robes, Sprout, Herbology. A nervous man in a purple turban who was fidgeting with his seat. Harry didn't know that one, and something about him made his skin prickle. And there was Severus. Sitting at the far end of the table in black robes, his dark eyes fixed on the first years with the expression of a man who had just been informed that his remaining years would be spent in this specific circle of hell. Harry caught his eye, and Severus's face did something fractional, a tightening around the mouth that was the closest thing to acknowledgement he ever gave in public. The song ended. The hall applauded. McGonagall unrolled a scroll. "When I call your name, you will come forward, Abbot Hannah." A blonde girl stumbled to the stool. The hat dropped over her eyes. 3 seconds of silence. Hufflepuff, the table on the right, erupted in cheers. The sorting had begun. Harry watched with clinical attention. The hat's deliberation time varied wildly. Some students were sorted in seconds, others sat for nearly a minute. Granger, the Muggle-born girl, took almost 2 minutes before the hat shouted Gryffindor. And she practically sprinted to the table. Longbottom took even longer, the hat clearly torn, before finally settling on Gryffindor as well. Malfoy, Draco. Draco rose, straightened his robes with a practiced flick, and walked to the stool with the bearing of a prince approaching his throne. The hat barely grazed his hair before screaming Slytherin, and Draco strode to the green and silver table with a smirk that said, "Was there ever any doubt?" Malfoy Hadrian. Harry stood. The hall was watching. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, the curiosity of a crowd that had just seen one Malfoy twin sorted and wanted to see if the set would match. He walked to the stool, sat down, and McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head. The great hall vanished. The noise, the candlelight, the staring faces, all of it disappeared, replaced by a soft, warm darkness and a voice that seemed to come from inside his own skull. Well, 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 what do we have here? The voice was old, not elderly old in the way that mountains are old. It carried the weight of 1,000 years of sorting, 1,000 years of peering into the minds of children and deciding their futures. Don't be nervous, boy, I've seen stranger things than you. Though not, I must admit, very many. Harry didn't flinch. He didn't close his mind. He'd been taught occlumency basics by his mother since age 9, enough to shield surface thoughts, but he had a feeling the sorting hat operated on a level that made occlumency irrelevant. Quite right, I don't read thoughts, I read souls, and yours is remarkable. Shall we have a look? Something shifted inside Harry's mind. It felt like a hand turning the pages of a book, gentle but thorough. The hat was looking at everything. Not his memories, not his thoughts, but something deeper. The architecture of who he was, courage in abundance, recklessness, even you'd charge a dragon if you thought it was the right thing to do. That's a Gryffindor's heart. I'm not a Gryffindor, Harry said aloud, though no sound escaped the hat's brim. Aren't you? There's more lion in you than snake, I think, but let's keep looking. Intelligence, sharp, intuitive, not scholarly but instinctive. You understand things before you can explain them. That's not Ravenclaw, that's something else. Ambition, oh yes, plenty of that, but not for power, for control. You want to control your own fate. Interesting. The hat paused. Harry felt it go still, like a dog catching a scent. Oh my, now that is unusual. What? You're wearing someone else's face, child. The words landed like a physical blow. Harry's hands gripped the edges of the stool. What are you talking about? The glamour. It's extraordinary work. I've never seen anything quite so thorough. But I see past skin and bone. I see the magic underneath, and your magic does not match the name on that scroll. Harry's heart was hammering. His thoughts were spinning, a cascade of half-formed questions, half-buried suspicions, moments that had never quite added up. The wand, Ollivanders' comment. His mother's eyes when she looked at him sometimes, that particular quality of love that carried an undertone of desperation, as though she was afraid he might vanish. You didn't know, the hat said, and its voice had shifted. Softer now, almost gentle. They didn't tell you. Tell me what do you see? I see a boy named Harry, but not the Harry the world is expecting. That doesn't make sense. It will. In time it will. The question before us now is where to put you, and that question has become considerably more complicated. The hat settled deeper onto his head. Harry could feel it thinking, weighing, measuring, running calculations against a millennium of data. Gryffindor would make you great. You have the heart for it, the raw, stubborn, damn the consequences courage that Godric prized above everything. You would thrive there. My brother is in Slytherin. Yes, and that matters to you. Family matters to you, perhaps more than anything. Me in Slytherin, because you want to be with your brother, or because you're afraid of what it would mean if the hat sorted you somewhere else. Harry went quiet. The question cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Because the truth was, the small, private, never-spoken truth, he'd always been afraid that he didn't belong. Not at the manor, not in the family, not in the neat pureblood narrative that had been built around him like a frame around a painting. He fit, but only if you didn't look too closely. Only if you didn't notice that the edges didn't quite match. There it is, the hat said, that's the core of you. Not ambition, not courage, not intellect, identity. You are a boy who does not know who he is, and everything you do, every choice, every instinct, every spectacular display of magic is an attempt to answer that question through sheer force of will. Where does that put me? Wherever you choose. Because choice, Harry, is the one thing that matters more than blood or talent or destiny. Godric knew that. Salazar knew it too, though he'd never have admitted it. Harry sat on the stool in the darkness behind the brim, and he thought about Draco, about his mother. About the world he knew and the world he suspected might be hiding behind it. And he made his choice not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because he wasn't ready to walk away from the people who loved him. Not yet, not until he understood why the hat had said he was wearing someone else's face. Slytherin, he said, put me in Slytherin and I'll figure out the rest myself. The hat was silent for a long moment. Very well, but remember this, Harry, there will come a day when the mask falls, and on that day you'll need to know who you are underneath it. Don't wait too long to start looking. The darkness lifted. The hat opened its brim. Slytherin, the green and silver table exploded in applause. Harry pulled the hat from his head, set it on the stool, and walked toward his brother on steady legs. Draco was grinning, saving the seat beside him, and Harry dropped into it and let the noise wash over him and told himself the shaking in his hands was just adrenaline. The hat's words echoed in his skull. You're wearing someone else's face. He looked down the table at the cheering Slytherins, at Draco's proud, sharp smile, at the green banners overhead, and he locked the hat's words away in a box in the back of his mind. alongside Ollivander's comment and his mother's trembling hands and every other piece of a puzzle he wasn't yet ready to assemble. Soon, but not tonight. Tonight he was a Malfoy, and Malfoys didn't show weakness at the dinner table. The feast was spectacular, but Harry barely tasted it. He ate because Malfoys ate at social functions. It was expected, it was part of the performance. He smiled when Draco introduced them to the table. He shook hands with Theodore Nott, a thin, quiet boy with watchful eyes. He nodded at Crabbe and Goyle, who were large and dim and eager to attach themselves to anyone with the Malfoy name. He exchanged polite, cautious greetings with Blaise Zabini, who slid into the seat on Harry's other side with the easy grace of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. But his attention kept drifting to the staff table. Dumbledore was watching him, not overtly. The headmaster's gaze swept the hall in a general, benevolent way, pausing on various students, smiling at the right moments. But twice, no, 3 times, Harry caught those blue eyes lingering on him for a fraction of a second longer than they should have. Not hostile, not suspicious exactly, more like puzzled, as though Dumbledore had heard a note he recognized but couldn't place. Severus was watching too, but that was expected. Severus watched everything. His dark eyes moved along the Slytherin table with the practiced surveillance of a man who trusted none of his students, and most of his colleagues even less. And then there was the man in the purple turban. He was sitting 2 seats from Severus, picking at his food with trembling hands, his eyes darting around the hall like a cornered animal's. Professor Quirrell. Harry had placed the name now, connecting it to Lucius's dismissive reference over dinner last month, the new defense teacher, a stuttering fool who spent a year abroad and came back frightened of his own shadow. Harry looked at Quirrell, and his scar, the scar he didn't know he had, buried under a decade of glamour, burned. The pain was extraordinary. It wasn't on the surface, it was underneath, behind his forehead in the bone, a white-hot spike that drove through his skull like a railroad nail. Harry's vision went white, his fork clattered to his plate. "Harry," Draco's voice sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" "Headache," Harry managed. He pressed 2 fingers to his temple and breathed through his teeth. The pain was already fading, a flash, not a sustained assault, but the afterimage lingered, a dull throb in a location that made no anatomical sense. "You look terrible." "Thank you, Draco, very supportive." "I'm serious, you're white as a sheet." "I'm a Malfoy, I'm always white as a sheet." Draco snorted despite himself, and the moment passed. Harry lowered his hand and glanced at the staff table. Quirrell was looking at him. Their eyes met, and the throb behind Harry's forehead spiked, not the full blinding pain, but a warning pulse like touching a hot stove. Harry held Quirrell's gaze. He didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't show the slightest reaction. He just looked at the man in the purple turban with the flat, evaluating stare that Narcissa called his dangerous face, and after 3 seconds, Quirrell was the one who broke eye contact. Interesting, Harry thought, and then, what the hell was that? He filed it away. The box in the back of his mind was getting crowded. The Slytherin common room was beneath the lake. Harry could feel the water above them, a vast, cold weight pressing down on the enchanted ceiling, and occasionally something large and dark would drift past the windows, tentacles or fins catching the green-tinted light. The room itself was all dark leather, carved stone, and silver fixtures, built for atmosphere rather than comfort. It felt like sitting inside a jewel box at the bottom of the ocean. "Home sweet home," Draco said, claiming the best armchair by the fireplace with the territorial confidence of a cat. The other first-year Slytherins were still settling in, finding their dormitories, unpacking trunks, establishing the social hierarchies that would define the next 7 years. Harry recognized the dynamic instantly. It was the same as every pureblood gathering he'd attended since childhood, just compressed into a smaller space. Everyone was sizing everyone else up. Alliances were forming. Power structures were crystallizing. The difference was that at pureblood gatherings, the Malfoy twins sat at the top by default. Here they were first years, bottom of the food chain, and some people clearly intended to remind them. Marcus Flint was a 5th year with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and a reputation for casual cruelty that preceded him down every corridor. He was holding court by the common room entrance when Harry and Draco passed, flanked by 2 other upper years whose names Harry didn't know and didn't care about. "Fresh meat," Flint said, loud enough for the room to hear. "The Malfoy princesses. Daddy buy you your way in, did he?" Draco stiffened. Harry didn't. "Marcus Flint," Harry said, not slowing down. 5th year, chaser on the Quidditch team. Held back a year for failing most of your OWLS. "My father mentioned you. He said your family's been trying to get a meeting with him for 3 years, but he keeps declining because he finds your mother tiresome." The common room went very quiet. Flint's face darkened. He stepped forward, blocking Harry's path, and he was a full head taller, broad-shouldered, with the physical advantage of 5 additional years. He looked down at Harry with the expression of a boy who had never been challenged by someone smaller than him and didn't know how to process it. "Watch your mouth, Firsty, or what?" The question was casual, conversational. Harry said it the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. But something in his voice, in the absolute absence of fear, the total lack of deference, made the room contract. People stopped pretending not to watch. Flint reached for his wand. Harry didn't move for his, didn't need to. The holly wand was still in his pocket, still warm, and the magic he'd been doing his entire life required nothing but intent and focus. Marcus. A new voice, Gemma Farley, the 6th-year Slytherin prefect, cutting across the room with the weary authority of someone who had seen this exact scenario play out every September. "Leave the first years alone, it's the first night. The little prat is Lucius Malfoy's son. Think about that for 10 seconds and then decide if this is the hill you want to die on." Flint's jaw worked. He stared at Harry and Harry stared back, and there was a moment, brief, electric, where it could have gone either way. Then Flint stepped aside with a grunt and a muttered insult that Harry didn't bother acknowledging. Harry walked past him. Draco followed, radiating tension, his hand still hovering near his wand. "Was that necessary?" Draco hissed once they were inside the first-year dormitory. "He needed to know where he stands. You just made an enemy. First night, Harry, first night. He was already an enemy. Now he's an enemy who knows I'm not afraid of him. That's better." Draco threw himself onto his bed. "You're going to get us killed. I'm going to get us respected. There's a difference." Harry sat on his own bed, the one nearest the window, through which he could see the murky green depths of the lake and the occasional flash of something silver and scaled. He pulled his wand from his pocket and held it up, studying it in the dim light. Holly and Phoenix Feather, brother to the Dark Lord's wand, chosen with a certainty that had filled an entire shop with golden light. "You're wearing someone else's face." He turned the wand in his fingers, feeling the pulse, the warmth, the sense of something vast and powerful waiting just below the surface. His magic had always been too much, too big, too wild, too eager. And now he had a wand that felt like a key sliding into a lock, and the door it opened led somewhere he didn't recognize. "Draco, what? Have you ever noticed anything different about me?" Draco propped himself up on one elbow. "You mean besides the fact that you can levitate furniture with your bare hands and your idea of conflict resolution involves threatening 5th years on day 1? I mean different from you." From the family, a pause. Draco's expression shifted, the performative boredom dropping away, replaced by something more careful. "You don't look exactly like us," he said slowly. "But Mum says you take after her side." "Right, and your magic is stronger than mine. That's not different, that's just your you. Some people are more powerful. Not at 10 years old, not like this." Another pause. Draco sat up fully, his pale eyes sharp. "What happened under the hat?" Harry held his brother's gaze. He could lie, he was good at lying, better than he wanted to admit, but this was Draco. Draco, who had been 3 feet away every day of his life. Draco, who would know the lie even if he couldn't prove it. "The hat said some things that didn't make sense, about my magic not matching my name." Draco's face went very still. "What does that mean?" "I don't know. Maybe nothing, maybe the hat's 1,000 years old and its brain's gone fuzzy." "You don't believe that?" They looked at each other across the narrow dormitory, 2 boys in green-trimmed robes, and the space between them felt thinner and more fragile than it ever had before. Not because anything had changed, but because Harry had finally started asking the questions he'd been avoiding for years, and the answers, when they came, would change everything. "Whatever it is," Draco said, "we'll figure it out, together." "Yeah, I mean it, Harry, you're my brother, whatever some dusty hat says." Harry nodded. The tightness in his chest eased just slightly. "Go to sleep, Draco." "You go to sleep, I will." He didn't. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the lake creak and murmur overhead, and turned the pieces of his puzzle over and over in his mind until the first gray light of dawn crept through the water. First day, potions was after lunch. They filed into the dungeon classroom, a cold, damp room lined with jars of things that floated in murky liquid and stared at you with dead eyes. The Slytherin first years shared the class with Gryffindor, which meant that Harry found himself seated across the aisle from the Longbottom boy and the Granger girl, both of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Severus entered like weather. The door banged open, his black robes billowing behind him with a dramatic flair that Harry privately suspected was achieved through enchantment, and he swept to the front of the room, turned and fixed the class with a stare that could have curdled milk. "There will be no foolish wand-waving or silly incantations in this class," he said, his voice soft and precise and utterly devoid of warmth. "As such, I don't expect many of you to appreciate the subtle science and exact art that is potion-making. However, for those select few who possess the predisposition, His eyes found Harry, held for a beat. I can teach you how to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. I can tell you how to bottle fame, brew glory, and even put a stopper in death. Harry met his gaze without blinking. Severus's expression was unreadable, but Harry knew this man, had known him his entire life. Severus Snape came to the manor 4 or 5 times a year, always at Narcissa's invitation, always for private conversations that ended abruptly when Harry or Draco entered the room. He was cold and sharp and difficult, but he'd also taught Harry his first shielding spell at age 9, slipping the knowledge into a conversation about ingredients while Narcissa pretended not to notice. "Longbottom," Severus said abruptly, whipping toward the Gryffindor side. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood?" Neville went pale. I don't know, sir." "Pity, Granger." The bushy-haired girl's hand was already up. "The draft of living death, sir." Severus looked at her for a long moment. "Correct. 5 points to Gryffindor." The room blinked. Harry raised an eyebrow. Severus Snape awarding points to a Gryffindor Muggle-born in the first 5 minutes of class was approximately as likely as Lucius Malfoy taking up Muggle folk dancing. Something was off. Then Severus's eyes swept back to Harry, and Harry understood. It was a performance. A specific, calculated performance designed to establish that Severus Snape was fair, that he rewarded knowledge regardless of house or blood, so that when he inevitably needed to favor the Slytherins or protect Harry specifically, he had a foundation of credibility to stand on. The man was playing a game within a game. Harry filed it away with a flicker of genuine admiration. The lesson began. Potions were, Harry quickly discovered, the one area where his raw magical power was completely irrelevant. You couldn't muscle your way through a bowl cure potion. You had to measure, cut, stir, time, precision work that rewarded patience and attention to detail, neither of which were Harry's strongest qualities. Draco was brilliant at it. His hands were steady, his cuts precise, his timing impeccable. Within 30 minutes, his cauldron contained a perfect, gently steaming potion of exactly the right shade of blue. Harry's cauldron was making ominous bubbling noises and had turned a shade of green that existed nowhere in the textbook. "You're stirring too fast," Draco muttered, leaning over. "Clockwise, not random circles." "I am stirring clockwise. That's counterclockwise. It's clockwise if you're looking at it from below." "Why would you look at it from Harry? Just stir the other way." Harry stirred the other way. The potion shifted from toxic green to passable teal. Severus drifted past their table, glanced into Harry's cauldron with an expression of profound resignation, and moved on without comment. The class ended. Students filed out. Harry lingered, ostensibly to clean his station, actually because Severus had caught his eye and given the barest nod toward the door at the back of the classroom. "Go ahead," Harry told Draco. "I want to ask Snape about the homework." Draco gave him a look that said he didn't believe this for a second, but was willing to let it go. He left. Harry waited until the room was empty, then walked to the back office. Severus was standing behind his desk, his arms folded, his face carved from granite. "Close the door." Harry closed it. "The sorting took 4 minutes, Severus said. "The average is 30 seconds. What happened? The hat and I had a conversation." "About?" Harry considered his options. Severus was his mother's closest ally, he knew that much. Whatever secrets existed in the Malfoy household, Severus was adjacent to them. Lying to him would be pointless and potentially dangerous. The hat said, "I'm wearing someone else's face." The silence that followed was so complete that Harry could hear the jars on the shelves settling. Severus's expression didn't change, not a single muscle moved, but something behind his eyes went very dark. "What else did it say?" "That my magic doesn't match the name on the scroll, that I have a Gryffindor's heart." Harry watched Severus's face for any reaction and found nothing. The man's occlumency was flawless. It also said, "I'm wearing a glamour." Severus sat down. The movement was controlled, deliberate, the kind of sitting down that a person does when the alternative is falling. "And what do you make of that?" he asked. "Think the hat is very old and very perceptive and has no reason to lie." "That's not what I asked. I asked what you make of it." Harry leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms, an unconscious mirror of Severus's own posture. "I think I've always known something was off. The power, it's too much. It doesn't fit. Draco and I are supposed to be twins, but we don't share a single magical trait. And Ollivander said something strange when I got my wand, about a scar." Severus flinched. It was minuscule, a contraction of the muscles around his eyes, there and gone, but Harry caught it. "You know," Harry said, "it wasn't a question. You know what the hat was talking about. Hadrian." "Tell me, this is not my truth to tell." "Then whose is it?" Severus looked at him for a long time. And Harry saw something he'd never seen on that face before, not coldness, not calculation, not the practiced disdain Severus wore like armor. What he saw was anguish, real, deep, poorly concealed anguish, visible for just a moment before the walls slammed back into place. Your mother's, Severus said. When the time is right, this conversation needs to happen with your mother. When is the time right? Not now, not while you're 11 and sitting in my office on the first day of term. I'm not going to wait 7 years. I'm not asking you to wait 7 years. I'm asking you to wait until I can ensure that the conversation happens safely. There are people in this castle who are watching you, Hadrian, people who would give a great deal to know what you and I are discussing right now. Dumbledore. Severus's jaw tightened. Harry had guessed, but the reaction confirmed it. The headmaster takes an interest in all new students, Severus said carefully. His interest in you may be more pronounced than usual. You will do nothing to encourage it. You will not seek him out. You will not answer personal questions, and if he invites you to his office for any reason, you will tell me first. Why? What does Dumbledore want with me? That is part of the conversation you need to have with your mother. Harry pushed off the door frame. Frustration crackled through him. He could feel his magic responding, the air in the room tightening, the jars on the shelves beginning to vibrate. He clenched his fists and forced it down. I'll wait, he said, but not long, and when I get the truth, I want all of it. You'll get it. Harry turned to leave. At the door, Severus's voice stopped him. Hadrian, he looked back. Severus's face was composed again, the walls fully rebuilt, but his voice carried something that Harry had never heard in it before, a weight that sounded almost like grief. You have your mother's eyes. Harry frowned. My eyes are gray. Yes, Severus said, they are. Harry left. He walked through the dungeon corridor, up the stairs, into the noise and light of Hogwarts, and the sentence rattled around his skull like a marble in a jar. You have your mother's eyes. Narcissa's eyes were blue. Harry's glamoured eyes were gray. The statement was factually wrong by any measure, unless Severus wasn't talking about Narcissa. Harry's hands were shaking again. He shoved them in his pockets and walked faster. The rest of the first week passed in a blur of classes, corridors, and the exhausting social dynamics of Slytherin House. Harry threw himself into it, partly because the work was genuinely engaging, and partly because it kept the questions at bay. Transfiguration was taught by McGonagall, who was as sharp and demanding in the classroom as she'd been in the entrance hall. She had them turning matches into needles on the first day, and Harry's match turned into a needle, then a knife, then a small silver dagger before he managed to wrestle his magic back under control. McGonagall stared at the dagger, then at Harry, and said, 5 points to Slytherin for enthusiasm, Mr. Malfoy, and please try to stop at the needle next time. Charms was taught by Flitwick, who fell off his stack of books when Harry's levitation charm lifted not just the feather but the desk, the chair, and 3 adjacent students into the air. Harry apologized. Flitwick from the floor declared it the most promising display of raw channeling he'd seen in 20 years and awarded 10 points to Slytherin. Defense against the dark arts was taught by Quirrell, and it was terrible. The man could barely complete a sentence without stuttering, flinched at loud noises, and smelled faintly of garlic, an odd combination that made the classroom feel like a haunted kitchen. But none of that was what bothered Harry. What bothered Harry was the headache. Every time he sat in Quirrell's classroom, the pain returned, that deep, bone-level throb behind his forehead, in a spot that corresponded to nothing visible but felt like it corresponded to something. It wasn't the blinding spike from the feast, it was a low, steady pressure, like a thumb pressing against a bruise, and Quirrell kept glancing at him. Quick, furtive looks, immediately redirected, but Harry caught everyone. There was something in those darting eyes that didn't match the stuttering, nervous exterior, something calculating, something hungry. That man is not what he pretends to be, Harry told Draco after their 3rd defense class. He pretends to be a terrified incompetent. Exactly, and he's neither. Draco gave him a sideways look. How can you tell? His stutter disappears when he thinks no one's listening. I heard him talking to himself in the corridor yesterday, clear as glass, and his eyes track movement like a duelist's. He knows where everyone in the room is at all times. So he's faking. He's performing. There's a difference. There's really not. But Draco filed it away because Draco always filed away Harry's observations, even the ones he argued with. The Malfoy twins had developed a system over the years. Harry noticed things, Draco acted on them. Harry was the intelligence network, Draco was the diplomatic corps. Together they covered angles that neither could manage alone. By the end of the first week, they had established themselves firmly in Slytherin's social ecosystem. Draco held court in the common room with Nott, Zabini, and Parkinson, the inner circle, carefully curated, bound by shared blood status and mutual ambition. Harry orbited the group but didn't anchor himself to it. He talked to everyone. He watched everything. He built a mental map of the house's power structure, who owed whom, who feared whom, who could be trusted, and who would sell you out for a better seat at dinner. Flint avoided them after the first night. Not because he'd forgiven the insult, but because he'd done the math and decided that antagonizing Lucius Malfoy's sons wasn't worth the satisfaction. Harry noted this and noted also that Flint watched them with the patient, resentful attention of someone waiting for an opportunity. Saturday morning, Harry woke early, dressed, and left the dormitory while Draco was still buried under his covers. He'd been at Hogwarts for 5 days, and he'd been so consumed by classes and social maneuvering that he hadn't done the one thing he'd wanted to do since arriving. He wanted to explore. Hogwarts was enormous, not just physically, but magically. The corridors shifted, the staircases moved. Rooms appeared and disappeared according to rules that seemed less like architecture and more like mood. Harry walked the castle in the gray pre-dawn light, letting his feet take him where they wanted, and the castle responded. Doors opened as he approached. Paintings watched him pass and whispered to each other. A suit of armor on the 4th floor saluted him, which he was fairly certain wasn't standard behavior. The magic here was old, layered, sentient in a way that made the wards on Malfoy Manor feel like a garden fence. Harry could feel it pressing against him, testing him, tasting his magic the way his magic tasted the world. He found himself on the 7th floor, standing in front of a blank stretch of wall across from a tapestry of a wizard being clubbed by trolls. Nothing remarkable about it, but the wall hummed. Harry pressed his palm against the stone and felt the hum intensify, a resonance like 2 tuning forks vibrating at the same frequency. "What are you?" he murmured. The wall didn't answer, but the humming didn't stop either. Harry filed the location away for later and moved on. He explored for 2 hours, mapping the castle in his mind, the hidden passages behind paintings, the trick steps on staircases, the shortcut between the dungeons and the 3rd floor that ran behind a mirror on the 2nd landing. By the time he returned to the common room for breakfast, he knew Hogwarts better than most 7th years. Draco was waiting for him, dressed and irritable. "Where were you?" "Walking." "For 2 hours. The castle's interesting." "The castle is a building, Harry." "No," Harry said, pulling on his robes. "It's really not." The first major incident happened on a Thursday evening in the 2nd week of term. Harry and Draco were heading back to the dungeons from the library. Draco had needed a reference text for his potions essay, and Harry had come along because the alternative was sitting in the common room listening to Crabbe and Goyle argue about Quidditch statistics when they turned a corner on the 3rd floor and walked into a situation. Flint, 3 other upper-year Slytherins, and on the ground, crumpled against the wall with a bloody nose and shattered glasses, was Neville Longbottom. "Teach you to walk through our corridor, blood traitor." Draco grabbed Harry's arm. "Don't." Harry shook him off. "Flint." His voice carried down the corridor with an authority that had no business coming from an 11-year-old. Flint turned, saw the Malfoy twins, and his lip curled. "Walk away, Firsty. This doesn't concern you." Harry kept walking toward them, not fast, deliberate. Each step measured, each footfall precise, his hands loose at his sides. He didn't reach for his wand. Draco was hissing something behind him, probably something sensible about self-preservation, but Harry wasn't listening. He stopped 10 feet from Flint and looked at Neville. The boy was conscious, his nose streaming blood, his eyes wide with the particular terror of someone who had been pinned down and hurt by people bigger than him and seen no way out. Harry looked back at Flint. 4 fifth years against 1 first year. That's not exactly a testament to Slytherin cunning. "I told you to walk away. And I told you on the first night where you stand. Did you forget, or are you just slow?" Flint drew his wand. The 3 other 5th years did the same. 4 wands pointed at Harry, 4 sets of eyes burning with the particular rage of older boys who had been publicly humiliated by a child and wanted blood. Harry didn't draw his wand. He didn't need to. The magic came like it always came, not from his wand, not from a spell, not from anything he'd been taught. It came from the core of him, from that vast reservoir of power that had been too much for his entire life, and it responded to his intent with an immediacy that bypassed every rule of magical theory he'd ever read. The corridor exploded. Not literally, nothing was destroyed, but every torch on the wall flared to 10 times its normal brightness. The stone floor cracked in a web pattern radiating from Harry's feet. The air pressure spiked so hard that all 4 fifth years staggered backward, their robes whipping in a wind that came from everywhere and nowhere. And Harry just stood there, calm, still, his ash-blonde hair barely ruffling, his gray-blue eyes flat and steady while the corridor around him vibrated like a struck bell. "Drop your wands," he said. "Now." Flint's hand was shaking. The wand trembled in his grip. He was staring at Harry with the expression of someone who has just realized that the thing they thought was a house cat is actually a lion. That's not. First years can't." "Drop your wands." 4 wands clattered to the floor. Harry let the pressure ease. The torches dimmed. The wind died. The cracks in the stone floor sealed themselves, the castle's own magic, Harry realized, responding to his, cleaning up after him like an indulgent parent. He walked past Flint, who flinched and crouched beside Neville. "Can you stand?" Neville stared at him. Blood dripped from his chin. You're a Malfoy." "Yes. Why are you helping me?" "Because 4-on-1 is pathetic, and I don't like pathetic things happening in my house. Come on." He pulled Neville to his feet and turned to Draco, who was standing at the end of the corridor with an expression that blended exasperation, awe, and something that looked very much like fear. "Draco, take him to the hospital wing." Yes, fine." "Come on, Longbottom." Draco took Neville's arm and steered him away, glancing back once at Harry with a look that said, "We are going to talk about this later." Harry nodded. Then he turned back to Flint and the 3 older students who were standing very still, their wands on the floor, looking at him like he was something they'd never seen before. "Pick up your wands," Harry said. "Go back to the common room and understand something." He stepped closer to Flint. Close enough that the older boy had to look down to meet his eyes, and the height difference meant nothing because the power differential was so vast that it inverted every physical advantage. "I don't care about house politics. I don't care about your grudges, but if I catch you or anyone doing this again, I will make what just happened feel like a warm-up. Are we clear?" Flint's jaw worked. His pride was screaming at him to push back, to reassert dominance. Harry could see it in his eyes, but his survival instinct was louder. "Clear," Flint said. "Good." Harry walked away. Behind him, he heard the 5th years scramble for their wands and retreat in the opposite direction, and he heard one of them whisper to Flint, "What the hell is he?" Good question. Harry didn't have an answer either. He made it around 2 corners before the shaking started. Not fear, he wasn't afraid. It was the magic, the sheer volume of it, still buzzing through his body like electricity through a wire. He'd released more in that corridor than he ever had before, and it had come so easily. No effort, no strain, like opening a tap on an ocean. He pressed his back against the wall and breathed. His wand was hot in his pocket, not just warm, hot, thrumming with energy, as though the Hollywood had been absorbing the overflow and was now saturated. "What am I?" The question wasn't new. But it had never felt so urgent. He straightened, composed his face, and headed for the dungeons. By the time he reached the common room, the shaking had stopped and the Malfoy mask was firmly back in place. The story spread through Slytherin like wildfire. By morning, every student in the house knew that Hadrian Malfoy had wandlessly overpowered 4 5th years in a corridor without breaking a sweat. The reactions were varied: fear from the older students, fascination from the younger ones, careful neutrality from the 6th and 7th years who recognized a shift in the power balance and wanted to be on the right side of it. Flint and his crew gave Harry a wide berth. Not just avoidance, active, deliberate distance, as though proximity itself was dangerous. The other first years watched Harry differently too. Zabini with calculating interest, not with quiet respect. Pansy Parkinson with something that might have been attraction and might have been ambition, which in Slytherin amounted to the same thing. Draco cornered him in the dormitory that night. "What you did in that corridor was insane." "Effective, though." "Insane, Harry. You didn't use a wand, you didn't use a spell, you just—" Draco waved his hands. "You just flexed and the entire corridor folded." "I wouldn't call it flexing." "What would you call it?" Harry sat on his bed and looked at his hands. "I don't know. Instinct. My magic just does what I want it to. That's not how magic works, it's how mine works." Draco sat on his own bed facing Harry, and his face was doing that thing, the thing where the performance dropped and the real Draco showed through. Worried, not of Harry, for Harry. "People are going to notice," Draco said. "Not just students, teachers, Dumbledore. Let them notice." "Harry, I'm done hiding it, Draco." The words came out harder than he intended. "I've spent my whole life being told to control it, contain it, don't let people see, but it's who I am, it's what I can do. And I'm tired of pretending it's less than it is." Draco studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, the way he did when he'd accepted something he couldn't change and was already adapting his strategy to account for it. "Fine," he said. "Then we use it. If you're going to be the most powerful first-year Hogwarts has seen in a generation, we make that work for us, politically, socially, strategically. Always the politician. One of us has to be." Harry smiled. It was a real smile, warm, grateful, the kind he only showed Draco. "Thanks, don't thank me. Just try not to crack any more floors. The castle has enough structural problems." They went to bed. The lake murmured overhead. Somewhere in the castle, Severus Snape sat in his office and wrote a letter to Narcissa Malfoy, and 2 floors above him, Albus Dumbledore sat in his study and stared at a spinning silver instrument that had, for the first time in 10 years, begun to move. The instrument had no name that anyone else would recognize. Dumbledore had built it himself decades ago, calibrated to a single magical signature, one he'd been tracking since the night of October 31, 1981. It was spinning now, slowly, uncertainly, like a compass finding its bearing. Not a full lock, the signal was muffled, obscured, as though someone had thrown a heavy blanket over a bonfire. But the fire was there, the signature was there. Somewhere in this castle, the magical core he'd been searching for was burning. Dumbledore watched the instrument spin and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the cold, electric thrill of a mystery presenting itself. Harry Potter was alive, and he was very, very close. The old man leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and began to think. Chapter 3 Blood and Mirrors. October crawled into Hogwarts like fog off the lake, cold, damp, and carrying with it the particular melancholy that only a Scottish castle could produce. The trees in the forbidden forest turned rust and gold, then bare. The grounds hardened. Students pulled their cloaks tighter and walked faster between classes, and the common rooms became the warm, crowded hearts of social life. Harry barely noticed the weather. He was too busy becoming something the school didn't have a category for. In the 6 weeks since the corridor incident, his reputation had undergone a transformation that Draco managed with the precision of a military campaign. The story of the Flint confrontation had spread beyond Slytherin, mutated, exaggerated, passed from mouth to mouth, until the version circulating among the Hufflepuffs involved Harry levitating all 4 fifth years and pinning them to the ceiling. Harry hadn't corrected it. Draco had actively encouraged it. "Perception is reality," Draco said, lounging in his armchair by the common room fire with the ease of a boy who had found his throne. "If people think you can pin 4 wizards to a ceiling, they'll act as though you can, and that's more useful than actually doing it." "I probably could, though," Harry said. "That's exactly the kind of thing that makes you terrifying. Stop saying it in public." But Harry didn't stop, because Harry had made a decision in the weeks after his conversation with Severus. He was done shrinking. Done modulating his magic to make other people comfortable. Done being reasonable. He'd spent his whole life with his mother's voice in his ear. "Careful, Harry, don't let them see too much," and he'd obeyed because he loved her and trusted her. But trust had limits, and his were fraying. The Sorting Hat's words lived in his chest like a splinter. "You're wearing someone else's face." Severus's cryptic non-answer. His mother's eyes every time she looked at him, that edge of panic hidden beneath the love, so he stopped hiding. Not dramatically, not with announcements or confrontations. He simply stopped holding back. In Transfiguration, when McGonagall asked them to turn a beetle into a button, Harry turned his beetle into a fully functional pocket watch with moving hands and a silver chain. McGonagall stared at it for 10 seconds, then asked him to do it again. He did. She awarded 15 points to Slytherin and kept the watch. In Charms, when they practiced the softening charm on stone blocks, Harry softened his block so thoroughly that it turned into liquid, flowed off the desk, and pooled on the floor before resolidifying into a perfect glass sphere. Flitwick applauded. The Ravenclaws in the class looked physically pained. In herbology, he calmed a violently aggressive venomous tentacula by placing his hand on its main stalk and pushing his magic into it. Not a spell, just raw intent, and the plant went from thrashing to purring like a cat in 3 seconds flat. Professor Sprout asked him how he'd done it. Harry said he'd asked it nicely. The teachers talked. Of course they talked. They were humans, and humans gossip, even in academic robes. By mid-October, a quiet consensus had formed among the Hogwarts staff that Hadrian Malfoy was the most naturally gifted student to walk the castle's halls in living memory. The comparisons being whispered in the staff room ranged from flattering young Dumbledore to alarming young Riddle, and the whispers hadn't escaped Harry's notice. Neither had Dumbledore's attention. The headmaster had not approached Harry directly. He was too clever for that, too patient. Instead, he orbited, present at meals, visible in corridors, his twinkling gaze landing on Harry with a frequency that couldn't be coincidental. Twice, Harry had rounded a corner and found Dumbledore standing there, apparently examining a painting or chatting with a ghost, but positioned with a precision that suggested the encounter was anything but accidental. Harry recognized the tactic. Lucius did the same thing at ministry functions, the strategic proximity, the appearance of casualness that was actually surveillance. The difference was that Lucius did it for political advantage, and Dumbledore did it because he was looking for something specific. Harry was starting to suspect he knew what. The Daily Prophet ran another piece in early October, Harry Potter, A Decade of Mystery, and Harry read it at the breakfast table while Draco demolished a plate of eggs beside him. The article rehashed the same old ground. The boy who lived, vanished from his Muggle relative's home sometime in November 1981, never seen again. Dumbledore's annual assurance that the boy was safe and well. The conspiracy theories ranging from plausible kidnapped by Death Eaters to deranged living with dragons in Romania. Harry read every word, then he folded the paper and looked down the table at Draco, who was watching him with careful eyes. "What?" Draco said. "Nothing." Harry poured himself more pumpkin juice. "Just thinking about missing children." Draco's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "Harry, when you say nothing in that particular tone of voice, it's never nothing. Then maybe you should stop asking what and start asking better questions." They stared at each other across the breakfast table, and the conversation they weren't having was louder than any of the ones happening around them. Draco opened his mouth, closed it, picked up his fork, and returned to his eggs with the deliberate focus of a boy who was choosing, consciously for now, not to pull on a thread that might unravel everything. Harry let him. The truth was patient. It could wait a little longer. Halloween arrived with a bang. Specifically with the bang of a 12-foot mountain trolls club smashing through a bathroom wall on the first floor. But Harry didn't know that yet. At the moment he was sitting in the Great Hall at the Halloween feast, watching Draco stack sugar skulls into an elaborate pyramid, while Pansy Parkinson pretended not to be impressed and Blaise Zabini provided architectural criticism. "The structural integrity is entirely dependent on the bottom left skull," Blaise observed. "Remove it and the whole thing collapses." "Don't you dare," Draco warned. "I'm merely making an observation about engineering principles." "You're looking for an excuse to ruin my masterpiece." "Boys," Pansy said, examining her nails with theatrical boredom, "you're both very clever. Can we discuss something interesting? Such as who cursed Katie Bell's broom during Quidditch tryouts last week." Harry was half listening to the conversation and half watching the staff table. Quirrell's chair was empty. It had been empty for 20 minutes, which was unusual. Quirrell never missed meals. He was too committed to his performance of nervous normalcy to break pattern. Severus's chair was also empty. Harry's scar, the hidden one, the one he didn't know about, had been aching all day. A low, steady pressure that he'd attributed to weather or stress or the general unease that had dogged him since September, but it was stronger tonight, sharper, like something was pushing against the glamour from the other side. The great hall doors burst open. Quirrell sprinted in, turban askew, face gray, his eyes wide and rolling. "Troll," he screamed. "Troll in the dungeons, just thought you should know." And he crumpled to the floor in a dead faint. The hall erupted. Students screamed. Tables shook. Dumbledore rose to his feet and fired a cannon blast from his wand that silenced the room instantly. "Prefects, lead your houses back to your dormitories. Teachers, follow me to the dungeons." Harry was on his feet before the sentence ended. "Our dormitory is in the dungeons." Draco went pale. That's where the troll is." "Exactly." Gemma Farley was already at the head of the Slytherin table, waving first years toward the door with an efficiency that suggested she'd practiced emergency drills. "Slytherin's this way. We'll take the long route through the second floor and circle around. That'll take 20 minutes, Harry said. "It'll keep us alive. Move, Malfoy." Harry didn't move. He was thinking, not panicking, not calculating, but running his instincts at full speed, and his instincts were telling him something didn't add up. A troll in the dungeons on Halloween. Trolls didn't wander into castles. They were too stupid to navigate corridors and too large to fit through most doors. Someone had let it in. Deliberately, on a night when the entire school was gathered in one place, distracted, celebrating. A diversion. Draco, go with the others. Number, I wasn't asking. And I'm not a house elf. Where you go, I go. That was settled before we got on the train. Harry looked at his brother, pale, set-jawed, wand already in his hand, and saw the same stubbornness he saw in the mirror every morning. Fighting it would waste time. "Fine, stay behind me." They broke from the group. Pansy called after them, "Where are you going?" But they were already through the side door and into the corridor, moving fast. Harry's senses stretched wide. He could feel the troll, not see it, feel it. A massive, dull presence somewhere below them, radiating the thick, stupid malice of a creature operating on pure instinct. But that wasn't what Harry was tracking. He was tracking the other thing, the sharp, focused, intelligent presence that had no business being near the troll. Something on the third floor, something moving with purpose toward the out-of-bounds corridor that Dumbledore had warned them about at the start of term. "The third floor," Harry said, taking the stairs two at a time. "Someone's using the troll as cover to get to the third floor." "How do you know that?" "I can feel it." "You can feel, Harry, that's not normal. When has anything about me been normal?" They reached the second floor. Harry turned right toward the stairs that led up and froze. A sound, coming from the girls' bathroom. Not the troll. The troll was still below them, its footsteps sending vibrations through the stone that Harry tracked automatically. This was different, smaller, human, crying. Harry pushed open the bathroom door. Inside, huddled against the far wall between the sinks and the toilet stalls, was Hermione Granger. Her face was red and blotchy, her bushy hair a mess, and she was crying with the particular abandon of someone who thought they were alone and had stopped caring about composure. She looked up, saw two Slytherin boys in the doorway. Her expression shifted from misery to alarm. There's a troll in the castle, Harry said. We need to move, now. A troll? That's not Professor Dumbledore would never. The floor shook, dust sifted from the ceiling. And then the smell hit them, a stench so foul, so overwhelmingly rotten that Draco gagged and Hermione pressed her hand over her mouth. Heavy footsteps in the corridor outside, getting closer. Oh, said Draco faintly, it's not in the dungeons anymore. The troll filled the doorway, 12 feet tall, gray, lumpy skin like wet concrete. Tiny, piggy eyes sunk into a skull the size of a boulder. It was carrying a club that looked like it had been torn from a tree, and it swung this club into the row of sinks as it entered, shattering porcelain and sending water spraying across the room. Hermione screamed. Draco swore, something that would have gotten him grounded at the manor. Harry stepped forward. The world slowed down. It was something that happened to him in moments of extreme intensity, a compression of time, a narrowing of focus, as though his magic and his mind synchronized at a frequency that operated outside normal seconds. He saw the troll's club arc upward. He saw the trajectory. It was going to come down on the stalls where Hermione was cowering. He had maybe 3 seconds. He didn't draw his wand. He didn't need 3 seconds. Harry threw his hand out, palm forward, and pushed, not with his muscles, with everything. Every ounce of the vast, wild, ungovernable power that had been building in him since birth, the power that cracked floors and bent corridors and made ancient castles pay attention, all of it compressed into a single point and driven forward like a battering ram. The troll flew backward, not stumbled, not staggered, flew. 12 feet of solid muscle and bone lifted off the ground and hurtled through the doorway, across the corridor, and into the opposite wall with an impact that shook the entire floor. Stone cracked. The troll's club shattered on impact, spraying splinters of wood the size of broomsticks. The creature slumped to the ground, conscious but dazed, shaking its massive head and blinking stupidly. Harry walked into the corridor. The troll was trying to stand, one hand braced against the cracked wall, its piggy eyes focusing on him with a dim animal fury. "Stay down," Harry said. The troll lunged. Harry caught it, not physically, magically. He extended both hands, an invisible force locked around the troll's limbs like chains, arresting its charge mid-stride. The creature thrashed, bellowed, its scream echoing off the stone walls, and Harry held it. The muscles in his arms were trembling, not from exertion but from the sheer volume of power flowing through him, a torrent that made his vision blur at the edges and filled his ears with a high, keening whine. He slammed the troll into the floor. The stone cratered. The troll went limp. Silence. Harry stood in the corridor, breathing hard, his hands still raised. The air around him was thick with magic, visible almost, a shimmer like heat off summer asphalt. His wand was blazing in his pocket, hot enough to feel through the fabric, and the Hollywood was singing a note so high-pitched that only he could hear it. "Harry," Draco's voice from the bathroom doorway, very quiet, "it's down." Harry lowered his hands. The shimmer faded. The corridor settled. The troll lay unconscious in a crater of broken stone, its breathing slow and heavy, a trickle of blood running from one nostril. He turned around. Draco was standing just inside the bathroom, his wand raised, his face white. Behind him, Hermione Granger was on her feet, her hands over her mouth, staring at Harry with an expression that combined terror, awe, and the frantic intellectual processing of someone who had just witnessed something that contradicted everything she'd ever read about magical theory. "That," Hermione whispered, "is not possible." "And yet," said Harry, running footsteps, voices. The teachers arrived in a thundering herd, McGonagall first, her face ashen, followed by Severus, who was limping badly and bleeding from a gash on his leg, and finally Quirrell, who took one look at the unconscious troll, clutched his turban and moaned. McGonagall stared at the troll, then at the crater, then at Harry, who was standing in the middle of the destruction with his hands in his pockets and an expression of mild inconvenience. "Explain," she said. "The troll came up from the dungeons, Professor. It attacked the bathroom where Granger was hiding. I stopped it." "You stopped it?" McGonagall looked at the crater again. "Mr. Malfoy, that troll weighs approximately 1 ton. "Yes, ma'am, and you stopped it. I wouldn't have had to if someone hadn't let it into the castle in the first place." The comment landed like a stone in still water. McGonagall's eyes sharpened. Severus's expression didn't change, but his gaze flicked to Quirrell, and Harry caught it, a microsecond of directed suspicion that confirmed everything he'd already guessed. Quirrell was looking at Harry, not with the nervous, darting glances of the classroom, with something else entirely. Something still and deep and hungry, visible for just a flash before the stuttering mask slammed back into place. "D-dreadful," Quirrell stammered. "Absolutely D-dreadful, are the children." "The children are fine," Severus said in a voice that could have frozen the lake. Hadrian, Draco, go back to your dormitory. Now, what about Granger? Draco asked. Miss Granger will be escorted to Gryffindor Tower. This is not your concern. Go. Harry went, not because Severus told him to, but because staying would invite questions he didn't want to answer. Questions about how an 11-year-old had thrown a mountain troll across a corridor without using a wand or an incantation. He walked through the castle with Draco at his side, and neither of them spoke until they were inside the Slytherin common room, which was empty. Everyone else was still being rerouted through the upper floors. Your hands are shaking, Draco said. Harry looked down. They were vibrating, really a fine, constant tremor, his fingers twitching with residual energy. He clenched his fists. I'm fine. You just threw a troll through a wall without a wand. I didn't throw it through the wall. I threw it at the wall. There's a structural difference. Harry, Draco grabbed his shoulders and turned him so they were face to face. Listen to me. What just happened, what you did, that's not first-year magic. That's not even seventh-year magic. I've read about wandless casting. It exists barely at the mastery level. Full-grown wizards who have trained for decades can do small wandless spells, light a candle, summon a quill. You just ragdolled a 12-foot troll. That's not possible. Apparently it is. Stop deflecting. I'm trying to help you. Harry pulled away from Draco's grip. Not roughly, gently, the way you disengage from someone you loved but couldn't look at right now. He walked to the window and stared out at the lake. Something large and dark moved in the depths, the giant squid, maybe, or something older. The hat said, I'm wearing someone else's face, Harry said quietly. Snape told me I have my mother's eyes, but he didn't mean Mum. Ollivanders said my wand's brother gave me a scar I don't have, and now this. He held up his trembling hands. I just threw a troll across a corridor using power that doesn't match anyone in our family tree. Yours or mine. Draco was very still. The common room's green light played across his sharp features, and he looked in that moment exactly like Narcissa, the same controlled composure masking something turbulent beneath. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying there's something Mum hasn't told us, something big, and I think it's about me. The silence stretched, the lake pressed against the windows. Somewhere above them, teachers were dealing with an unconscious troll and the questions it raised. And somewhere above them, Dumbledore was sitting in his office watching a silver instrument spin faster than it had all month, because whatever Harry had done in that corridor, it had burned through 3 layers of glamour like sunlight through fog, and for 60 seconds, the magical signature of Harry Potter had blazed across every detection ward in the castle like a signal flare. The instrument was spinning so fast now that it hummed. Dumbledore reached for a quill and parchment. Severus, my office, tonight. We need to talk about the Malfoy boy. November. The castle settled back into routine after the troll incident, but the routine had shifted subtly like furniture rearranged in a familiar room. Students moved differently around Harry, not with fear exactly, though there was some of that, more with a heightened awareness, the way you move around something powerful that might be friendly or might not. The Gryffindors, predictably, reacted the most visibly. Ron Weasley, a red-haired first-year who had appointed himself the voice of anti-Slytherin sentiment, declared loudly at breakfast that Hadrian Malfoy was probably a dark wizard, because only dark wizards can do wandless magic like that. This earned him a withering look from Hermione Granger, who had not forgotten that Harry had saved her life, and who corrected Ron's magical theory with the devastating thoroughness of someone who had read the entire Hogwarts library twice. Wandless magic is not inherently dark, Ronald. It's a function of magical power and focus. Merlin was a wandless caster, so was Morgana Le Fay, and Dumbledore himself reportedly dueled Grindelwald using wandless. Granger, I didn't ask for a lecture. Then don't say things that are factually wrong in front of people who know better. Harry heard about this exchange from Neville Longbottom, of all people, who had taken to nodding at Harry in corridors with the silent gratitude of a boy who remembered being pinned against a wall by 4th years and rescued by a Malfoy. The social lines at Hogwarts were supposed to be clear. Slytherin and Gryffindor didn't mix, pureblood and Muggleborn didn't mix, and nobody mixed with the Malfoy twins unless they wanted to be associated with the most polarizing first years in a generation. Harry ignored these lines, not provocatively, not as a political statement. He simply treated them as irrelevant. If Neville Longbottom wanted to say hello, Harry said hello back. If Hermione Granger wanted to discuss magical theory in the library, which she increasingly did, drawn to Harry's raw intuitive understanding the way a moth is drawn to a flame, Harry discussed it. When a Hufflepuff 3rd year named Cedric Diggory struck up a conversation about Quidditch on the moving staircase, Harry talked Quidditch for 15 minutes and made a friend without once considering house affiliation. Draco found this maddening. "You're diluting the brand," he complained, watching Harry walk back from what appeared to have been a pleasant conversation with a Ravenclaw second year. "We don't have a brand. We absolutely have a brand, Malfoy. It means something. It means pureblood Slytherin selective. You can't just talk to people, all people, random people. Watch me. I am watching you. It's horrifying." But even Draco had to admit that Harry's open-door policy was yielding results. Information flowed to the Malfoy twins from every house now, who was feuding with whom, which teachers were playing favorites, which prefects were corrupt, which students had secrets worth knowing. Harry collected intelligence the way other boys collected chocolate frog cards, and he shared it with Draco, who used it with surgical precision. They were building something, not a faction, nothing so crude, a network, a web of relationships and obligations and mutual interests that spanned all four houses and operated entirely outside the formal power structures. Draco was the spider at the center, but Harry was the web itself, touching everything, connected to everything, impossible to ignore. Severus watched it happen with an expression that alternated between pride and dread. He'd received Dumbledore's summons the night of the troll incident and spent an excruciating hour in the headmaster's office, deflecting questions with the practiced skill of a double agent. Yes, Hadrian Malfoy was powerful. Yes, the wandless display was unusual. No, Severus didn't think it warranted special attention. The boy was from the black bloodline, metamorph magic, volatile power. It ran in the family. Dumbledore had listened patiently, his blue eyes twinkling behind his half-moon spectacles, and Severus had known, with the cold certainty of long experience, that the old man hadn't believed a word. "The instrument in my office, Severus," Dumbledore had said, his voice gentle. "The one calibrated to young Harry Potter's magical signature. It reacted during the troll incident, quite strongly in fact. The instrument has been unreliable for a decade, you've said so yourself. Unreliable, yes, but not, I think, broken. It's been detecting intermittent bursts for weeks now, small ones easily dismissed, but the burst during the troll incident was unmistakable." Dumbledore had leaned forward and the twinkle had gone out of his eyes, replaced by something flat and hard and ancient. "There is a child in this castle whose magical core matches Harry Potter's. I intend to find that child, Severus, and I would very much appreciate your help." Severus had promised to keep his eyes open. Then he'd gone back to his quarters and written a letter to Narcissa in code so dense that it would take her 2 hours to decipher it, but the core message was simple. He knows. Not who, not how, but he knows Harry Potter is here. The glamour is failing during power surges. You need to come. Narcissa's reply arrived the next morning by private owl. 3 words, also in code, "I'm already coming." She arrived on a Saturday, sweeping into the entrance hall in charcoal robes and an expression of maternal concern so perfectly calibrated that no one questioned why Narcissa Malfoy was visiting Hogwarts 6 weeks into term. She told McGonagall she was worried about the troll incident. Had her boys been in danger? Was the school's security adequate? The kind of questions that a wealthy, influential parent would naturally ask, delivered with a warmth that made even McGonagall soften slightly. She found Harry and Draco in the library. They were at a corner table, Harry surrounded by books on advanced magical theory, while Draco drafted an essay with the meticulous penmanship that Lucius had drilled into them both. "Mum." Draco looked up, surprised and pleased. "What are you doing here? Visiting my sons? Is that not allowed?" She hugged them both, Draco first, quick and warm, then Harry, and Harry felt her arms tighten fractionally, the embrace lasting a beat longer than usual, her fingers pressing into his shoulders as though checking that he was real and solid and still here. "Can we go somewhere private?" she asked, and her voice was calm, but her eyes were doing the thing Harry had been noticing his entire life, that edge of fear beneath the love. They used a disused classroom on the 4th floor. Narcissa cast silencing charms and privacy wards with a speed and thoroughness that spoke to years of practice. Then she turned to face her sons, and Harry saw something he'd never seen on his mother's face before. She was terrified, not performing terror, not dramatizing concern, genuinely deeply frightened in a way that the most composed woman Harry had ever known couldn't fully hide. "Mum," he said, "what's wrong? Severus tells me the troll incident was significant. I stopped a troll. It wasn't that. You threw a mountain troll across a corridor without a wand." Every detection ward in the castle registered it. The headmaster's instruments reacted. She paused, and her composure cracked just a little, just around the edges. "Harry, I need to tell you something, both of you." Draco had gone very still. He was looking at Narcissa with the expression of a boy who has just realized that the floor beneath him is thinner than he thought. "What is it?" he asked. Narcissa sat on the edge of a desk. She folded her hands in her lap, and Harry watched her assemble the words, watched the struggle between the truth and the decade of lies she'd built around it. Not yet, she said. Not here, I need to speak with Severus first. There are protections that need to be in place before I can. She stopped, breathed. I came to reinforce the glamour. The glamour, Harry repeated. Narcissa looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the confirmation of everything he'd suspected. The hat's words, Ollivanders' slip, Severus's anguished non-answers, the wand, the power, the face in the mirror that didn't quite match the family it belonged to. You know, she whispered, you already know something. I know the Sorting Hat told me I'm wearing someone else's face. I know Ollivander nearly called me Harry Potter. I know my magic doesn't match any Malfoy or Black in recorded history. He kept his voice level, controlled, Malfoy trained. But beneath the control, something enormous was building, a pressure in his chest that felt like his magic, felt like his identity, felt like 11 years of love and lies reaching critical mass. And I know you're scared. You've been scared my whole life, not of me for me, because of what I am. Narcissa's eyes filled. She didn't let the tears fall, she was too much herself for that, but they were there, bright and terrible, and Harry had never seen his mother cry. Mum, Draco's voice was sharp. What is he talking about? I can't, she said. Not here, not without Severus, not without protections. Dumbledore is in this castle, and if he, then bring Snape now, tonight, because I'm not waiting anymore. Harry, I have a right to know who I am. The sentence hit the room like a physical force. The windows rattled, the desks trembled. Harry's magic was responding to his emotion, swelling outward, and he could feel the glamour on his face shift, not break, but strain, like fabric stretched too tight. Narcissa was on her feet instantly. Her wand was in her hand, and she was casting, fast, precise, layering reinforcement spells over the glamour with the practiced urgency of someone who had done this many times before. Harry felt the magic settle over his skin like a cool compress, smoothing the cracks, pushing the real face back beneath the constructed one. Don't, she breathed. Harry, please control it. If the glamour breaks here, then tell me the truth and I won't have to be angry. I will. But let me do it properly. Let me protect you first. She cupped his face in her hands and her fingers were trembling. You are my son. Whatever you learn, whatever changes, you are my son. Promise me you'll remember that. Harry looked into his mother's eyes, blue, not gray, not green, blue, and he saw the full weight of 11 years bearing down on her. The love, the fear, the desperate, clawing determination that had driven her to steal a baby off a doorstep and rebuild his entire identity. Tomorrow, he said. You have until tomorrow. She nodded, kissed his forehead, reinforced the glamour one final time. Then she turned to Draco, who was standing rigid by the door with the expression of a boy watching his world rearrange itself. Draco, come here. Is Harry my brother? The question was quiet, devastating. Draco's voice didn't waver, Malfoy training held, but his eyes were raw. Yes, Narcissa said, in every way that matters, yes. That's not what I asked. Narcissa closed her eyes. Tomorrow, Draco, I'll answer everything tomorrow. She left. The privacy wards fell. The classroom returned to its ordinary, dusty silence, and two boys stood in it, surrounded by questions that had no answers yet. Draco looked at Harry. Harry looked at Draco. And for the first time in their lives, the space between them felt like a chasm. I'm still me, Harry said. Are you? Yes, Draco's jaw worked. His eyes were bright, not with tears, because Malfoy's didn't cry, but with the concentrated effort of not crying. You'd better be, he said, because if you're not, I'm going to be very annoyed. Harry laughed. It came out rough and broken and not entirely like a laugh, but it was real, and Draco's face cracked into something that was almost a smile, and they stood there in the dusty classroom and held on to each other with their eyes because they were 11 and too proud to hug in an empty room. Come on, Harry said. Let's go find dinner. I'm not hungry. You're always hungry. Fine, I'm always hungry. They left the classroom together, shoulder to shoulder. Whatever was coming, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything, together, loudly and with more courage than sense. But tomorrow didn't come the way Narcissa planned. That night Harry couldn't sleep. The dormitory was dark, the lake murmuring overhead, Draco's breathing slow and steady in the next bed. Harry lay on his back and stared at the ceiling, and his mind wouldn't stop. He got up, dressed, slipped out of the dormitory and through the common room, empty at 2 in the morning, and into the castle. He didn't have a destination. His feet moved on their own, guided by the restless energy that always drove him when his thoughts became too loud. The castle was different at night, quieter, colder, the paintings sleeping in their frames, the corridors lit by guttering torches that cast long, shifting shadows. He found himself on the 3rd floor, the forbidden corridor. He'd been curious about it since Dumbledore's warning at the start of term. The 3rd floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death, and curiosity, in Harry, was a force as powerful as magic. He'd been avoiding it deliberately, waiting for the right moment, waiting until he knew enough to understand what he found. But tonight he wasn't being strategic, he was being reckless. Because in 12 hours his mother was going to tell him who he really was, and the anticipation was eating him alive, and he needed to do something or he was going to burn a hole through the castle floor. The door was locked, a standard locking charm. He dissolved it with a wave of his hand, barely thinking about it. The door swung open. Inside was a three-headed dog. The creature was enormous, filling the entire room, its 6 eyes blinking in the sudden light, 3 sets of jaws already opening to reveal teeth the size of kitchen knives. It saw Harry and lunged, all 3 heads snapping forward, a tripled roar that shook dust from the ceiling. Harry raised his hand. The dog froze, not because he'd cast a spell, because his magic had reacted on instinct, flooding the room with a pressure so dense that even a creature this massive couldn't push through it. The 3 heads strained against the invisible wall, drool streaming from their jaws, growling with a fury that vibrated in Harry's bones. He looked down. The dog was standing on a trapdoor. So that's what you're guarding. He didn't open the trapdoor. He wasn't stupid. Whatever was down there was protected by Dumbledore himself, and Harry had no interest in triggering defenses he didn't understand. Instead, he memorized the room's layout, noted the dog's size and apparent magical resistance, and filed it all away. Then he left, relocking the door behind him, and walked back through the dark corridors. He turned a corner on the 2nd floor and walked into the Mirror of Erised. It was standing in an empty classroom, tall, ornate, gold-framed, with an inscription carved along the top that Harry read backward without thinking. "I show not your face, but your heart's desire." The mirror had no business being in a random classroom at 2 in the morning, and its placement felt deliberate, staged, even, as though someone had put it here knowing that a restless boy might wander past. Harry didn't care. He was looking at the mirror, and the mirror was looking back, and what it showed him stopped his heart. His reflection was wrong. The boy in the mirror was his height, his build, standing in his exact posture with his hands in his pockets. But the hair was black, jet black, wild, sticking up in every direction. And the eyes were green, not gray-blue, not Malfoy. Green, vivid as summer, bright as poison, alive with an intensity that made the glamored eyes he wore every day look like a watercolor beside an oil painting. The scar, a lightning bolt, raw and livid, cutting across the boy's forehead. And behind him, standing in the mirror but not in the room, were 2 people Harry had never seen. A man with black hair and glasses, grinning with a reckless joy that Harry recognized because he felt it every time he did something dangerous. A woman with red hair and green eyes, his eyes the real ones, the ones buried under a decade of lies, smiling at him with a love so fierce and so familiar that it ripped through his chest like a blade. Harry stood in front of the mirror and his glamour shattered, not flickered, not strained, shattered. The layers that Narcissa had built and reinforced for 11 years broke apart like ice in spring, and the change rippled across his body in a wave, hair darkening from ash blonde to black, eyes shifting from gray to green, features reshaping from the angular Malfoy mask to something softer, rounder, unmistakably his own. The lightning bolt scar burned into visibility on his forehead. Harry stared at his reflection, his real reflection. The black-haired, green-eyed, scar-bearing boy stared back. "Oh," he said, the word was very small. It echoed in the empty classroom and came back to him changed, carrying with it the weight of everything he'd suspected and feared and denied. He raised a hand to his forehead and touched the scar, and it was hot, raised, ridged, real Harry Potter. He was Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the vanished hero, the child Dumbledore had been searching for, the orphan whose parents had been murdered by Voldemort. The baby who had been left on a doorstep in November in the cold with nothing but a blanket and a letter, and Narcissa had taken him, stolen him, raised him as her own, built a new face over his real one and given him a new name and loved him fiercely and desperately for 11 years while the entire wizarding world searched for a boy who was sleeping in the next room from Draco Malfoy. Harry pressed his palms against the mirror. The glass was cold. The couple behind his reflection, his parents, were still smiling at him. James Potter, Lily Potter. He knew their names from the newspapers, from the history books, from the very articles he'd read at the breakfast table while sitting beside his brother, who wasn't his brother in a family that wasn't his family in a life that wasn't his life. The mirror cracked. A single fracture running from top to bottom, splitting his reflection in 2, one half showing his real face, the other showing the empty room behind him. The crack widened, the glass groaned. Harry pulled his hands away. His magic was surging, enormous, uncontrolled, shaking the floor, rattling the windows, making the mirror's gold frame vibrate like a struck tuning fork. He couldn't contain it, didn't want to contain it. Every emotion he'd ever suppressed, every question he'd ever swallowed, every time he'd looked in a mirror and felt the wrongness he couldn't name, it was all coming up at once, and his magic was the vehicle. Every window in the classroom exploded outward. The sound of shattering glass rang through the corridor, and Harry stood in the wreckage with his real face and his parents' eyes and a decade of stolen identity bleeding out of him like a wound. Footsteps running, close. Harry turned. The classroom door was open, had it always been open, and standing in the doorway, white-faced, breathing hard, still in his pajamas with his wand drawn, was Draco. Draco stared at him, at his black hair, his green eyes, the scar on his forehead. The face that looked nothing like a Malfoy and everything like the photographs in the Daily Prophet. "Harry," Draco whispered. "Yeah," Harry's voice cracked. "It's me." Draco's wand hand dropped to his side. He took one step into the room, then another, his eyes wide, his mouth open, processing the impossible with the rapid-fire intelligence that was the best thing about him. "You're Harry Potter," Draco said. "Apparently, the boy who you're Harry Potter. I heard you the first time." Draco's face crumpled, not slowly, not gracefully, it just collapsed, the Malfoy mask disintegrating in real time, and underneath was a boy who had just learned that his twin brother was someone else entirely. "You're not my brother," he said. You're not my brother." The words hit Harry harder than the troll had, harder than anything had ever hit him. He flinched, actually physically flinched, and his magic recoiled with him, pulling inward, contracting, the shattered glass on the floor trembling. "Draco, my whole life, you were right there, and you're not even. Mum lied about everything. Every day, Draco was shaking. His voice was ragged. He was 11 years old and his world was ending. Who are you? Who are you?" "I'm me." Harry took a step forward and Draco took a step back, and the distance between them was the worst thing Harry had ever felt. "I'm the same person I was yesterday, the same person I've always been. I didn't know Draco, I didn't know any of this, but you suspected. You told me the hat, the wand, you knew something. I suspected, I didn't know. And even if I had, even if I'd known since the day I was born, what would it change? You're my brother. You've been my brother every day of my life. I'm not. We don't share blood. We don't share parents. We don't share anything real. Everything is real. Every minute was real. Do you think I care about blood?" Harry's voice was rising, raw, stripped of every defense he'd ever built. "Blood is the thing, Father, the thing Lucius cares about. Blood is a line on a chart. You and me, what we have, that's not blood, Draco. That's choice. You chose me every single day. Are you going to stop now because of a face in a mirror?" The room was very quiet. The glass had settled. Harry's magic had pulled in tight, coiled, dense, waiting. The mirror behind him still showed his real face, the crack running through it, his parents smiling from the other side of the broken glass. Draco was crying, not sobbing. Malfoy's didn't sob, but tears were running down his pale cheeks, and he wasn't wiping them away, and the sight of it broke something in Harry that he hadn't known could break. "You're still you," Draco said. It wasn't a question. It was a desperate statement of fact, grabbed onto like a lifeline. "I'm still me. Promise. I promise." Draco crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed Harry in a hug so fierce that it drove the air from both their lungs. Harry held on. They stood in the wreckage of the classroom, broken glass, cracked mirror, shattered glamour, and they held onto each other with the stubborn, terrified grip of 2 boys who refused to let a lie destroy the one true thing they had. "Your hair is stupid," Draco said into Harry's shoulder. "Your face is stupid. You look like a hedgehog. You look like a ferret." Draco laughed. It was wet and broken and sounded like a sob's first cousin, but it was a laugh, and Harry laughed too, and the sound of it filled the empty classroom and pushed back the darkness by inches. They pulled apart. Draco looked at Harry's real face, studied it with the intense, cataloging attention of someone memorizing something important. "Green eyes," Draco said. "The hat was right. You do have a Gryffindor's heart." "Shut up. Make me Potter." The name landed strangely. Not wrong, not right, just new. A door opening onto a room Harry had never been in. "Don't call me that yet," he said. "I'm not ready. What do I call you?" "Harry, just Harry, like always." Draco nodded. Then his expression shifted, the tears drying, the jaw setting, the Malfoy strategist reassembling from the wreckage of the Malfoy boy. "We need to fix the glamour," Draco said, "before someone sees. I don't know how. Mum always, then we find her. She's staying at the 3 Broomsticks in Hogsmeade. I overheard her telling Snape. We can't leave the castle at 2 in the morning. We can if we don't get caught. Come on." But before they could move, footsteps echoed in the corridor, deliberate, unhurried, and accompanied by the soft swish of heavy robes. Harry's wand buzzed a warning. Draco's hand flew to his own wand. Severus Snape appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene in a single sweep: the broken glass, the cracked mirror, the two boys, and Harry's face. Harry's real face. Black hair, green eyes, Lily's eyes. Severus made a sound. It was barely audible, a sharp intake of breath, bitten off immediately, but Harry heard it, and in that tiny involuntary noise was more emotion than Severus had shown in 11 years of carefully maintained composure. "The glamour broke," Harry said. "I can see that." Severus's voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat. "Stepped into the room." His eyes never left Harry's face, and Harry could see the pain in them, not hidden, not controlled, just there, naked and enormous, a grief so old and so deep that it had become a permanent feature of the landscape. "You knew," Harry said. "You always knew." "Yes, who I am. Yes, say it." Severus's jaw clenched. His hands were fists at his sides. The greatest Ollivanders in Britain was standing in a classroom at 2 in the morning with his defenses in ruins, looking at the son of the woman he'd loved and the man he'd hated, and for once in his life, the mask was gone. "You are Harry James Potter," Severus said, "the son of James Potter and Lily Evans. You were born on July 31, 1980. On October 31, 1981, the Dark Lord murdered your parents and attempted to kill you. You survived, he did not. And on November 1, 1981, Albus Dumbledore left you on the doorstep of your Muggle aunt and uncle and Narcissa Malfoy." His voice broke, restarted. "Narcissa Malfoy took you. She took you because you were cold and alone and left on a stone step like rubbish, and she could not bear it. She took you and she gave you a name and a face and a family, and she has spent every day since then trying to keep you safe." The words filled the room. Harry stood in them, breathing, his hands at his sides, and something massive shifted inside him, tectonic, fundamental, the bedrock of his identity cracking and reforming. "She stole me," he said. "She saved you. From what? From a family that would have hated you, from a cupboard under a staircase, from a childhood without magic, without love, without anyone who understood what you were." Severus stepped closer. "I knew Lily's sister. I knew what that house would have been. Narcissa's way was not right, I will not pretend it was, but the alternative was worse. I believed it then, I believe it now." Harry looked at the mirror. His parents smiled at him from behind the crack. James Potter's grin, Lily Evans's eyes. "I need to see my mother," he said. "My Narcissa. She's at the Three Broomsticks. I know, Draco told me." Severus's gaze flicked to Draco, who was standing rigidly by the door with tear tracks on his face and his wand still drawn. "Mr. Malfoy," Severus said, "how are you handling this?" "Terribly," Draco said, "but I'm a Malfoy. We handle things terribly with excellent posture." Something that might have been a smile ghosted across Severus's face. "Your mother is expecting me. I'll bring her here. Neither of you moves from this room." He drew his wand and began casting not just silencing charms but heavy wards, detection spells, alert triggers. The room sealed itself like a vault. "If anyone approaches, you'll know. If the wards break, you run not to the dormitory, to my office. The password is Asphodel." "Snape," Harry said, "the glamour, can you? Not the way your mother does. Her spell work is beyond mine in this area. But I can do a temporary concealment, enough to mask the scar and the eyes until she arrives." He raised his wand, and Harry felt the magic settle over his face, thinner than Narcissa's work, rougher, like a bandage rather than a second skin. "It won't hold under stress. Control your emotions. I just found out my entire life is a lie. My emotions are not taking requests right now." "Then fake it. You're a Malfoy. You're good at faking things." The words were sharp, but the delivery was gentle as Severus Snape ever got. He turned, his black robes swirling, and swept toward the door. 20 minutes. Don't touch the mirror again." He was gone. Harry and Draco stood in the warded classroom, surrounded by broken glass and the truth, and waited for the woman who had built their world to come and explain why she'd built it on a lie. 20 minutes, the longest 20 minutes of Harry's life. He spent them standing in front of the cracked mirror, looking at the face underneath Severus's temporary charm, the face that was his, had always been his, and that he was only now seeing for the first time. Black hair, green eyes, the scar. Draco stood beside him and said nothing, but he didn't leave, not for a single second. Whatever was coming, they were going to face it together, like brothers. Chapter 4, The Truth Beneath the Skin. Narcissa came through the door like a woman walking to her own execution. She was dressed fully, immaculately, as though she'd never gone to bed, which she probably hadn't. Her charcoal robes were pressed, her hair was perfect, her posture was flawless. But her face was the face of someone who had been expecting this moment for 11 years and had never once figured out how to survive it. Severus was behind her. He sealed the door, reinforced the wards, and stationed himself against the far wall with his arms crossed, not participating, not retreating, standing guard. Narcissa looked at Harry. Severus's temporary charm was still in place, masking the scar in the eyes, but she could see through it. Of course she could. She'd built the original glamour. She knew every layer and every flaw, and what she saw in her son's face made her stop 3 feet from him, as though she'd walked into glass. "Harry," she said. "The glamour broke," he said. "I saw my real face in the mirror. I know. Snape told me who I am." Her eyes closed, just for a second, a blink that lasted a beat too long, and when they opened, they were bright with tears she was refusing to shed. "I was going to tell you tomorrow. I was going to do it properly. There's no proper way to tell someone their entire life is a fabrication." The words came out colder than he intended. He saw them hit her, saw the flinch, the micro-contraction of her face, and something in him wanted to take them back, wanted to cross the room and let her hold him and pretend that nothing had changed. But he couldn't, because everything had changed, and the boy who would have let her smooth this over didn't exist anymore. He died in front of a cracked mirror 20 minutes ago. "Tell me everything," Harry said, "from the beginning. No lies, no omissions, no managing my reaction, everything." Narcissa sat down on the edge of a desk. Her hands were folded in her lap, and Harry could see them trembling, the same trembling he'd noticed his whole life in unguarded moments when she thought no one was watching. He'd always attributed it to stress. Now he understood it was guilt. "November 1st, 1981, she began. "The night after the Dark Lord fell, I went to Privet Drive." She told them everything: the street, the doorstep, the cold, the baby with the lightning bolt scar wrapped in a too-thin blanket, lying beside a milk bottle with a letter pinned to his chest. Dumbledore's choice to leave the most important child in the wizarding world with muggles who didn't know he existed and wouldn't open their door until morning. She told them about the impulse, the raw maternal fury that had bypassed every rational thought and put a stranger's baby in her arms. She told them about the glamour, 40 minutes of the most complex spell work she'd ever performed, black family magic woven into a stolen child's skin until his face matched the family she was giving him. She told them about Lucius, the lie, the performance, the backdated birth certificate, the willful ignorance that had held for a decade because Lucius Malfoy would rather live with a comfortable fiction than confront an uncomfortable truth. She told them about Severus, how he'd figured it out within a year, how he'd confronted her, how he'd chosen to keep the secret for the sake of a dead woman's son. She told them about Dumbledore, the decade-long search, the instruments and tracking spells, the annual profit statements, the growing desperation of a man who had lost the chess piece he considered most important and couldn't find it. She told them about Harry's parents. James Potter, pureblood Gryffindor, arrogant and brave and reckless, who had died standing between his family and the Dark Lord without a wand in his hand. Lily Evans, muggle-born, brilliant, fierce, whose love had created the protection that saved her son's life and destroyed the most powerful dark wizard in a century. She told them everything, and when she finished, the room was silent. Harry hadn't moved. He'd listened standing up, his arms crossed, his face carved from stone. Not the Malfoy mask, something harder, something new. The face of a boy who was assembling a new version of himself in real time, brick by brick, from the wreckage of the old one. Draco was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, his head bowed. He hadn't spoken since Narcissa entered the room. "So," Harry said, his voice was very even. "I'm Harry Potter. My parents were murdered by Voldemort. I survived because my mother, my birth mother, died protecting me. Dumbledore left me with muggles, and you stole me. I saved you. You stole me, and you rebuilt my face, and you gave me to a man who served the wizard who murdered my parents." The sentence landed like a killing curse. Narcissa went white. Lucius was never, he was a Death Eater. Harry's voice didn't rise, it got quieter, which was worse. He served Voldemort. He was in the inner circle. He bought his way out with gold and a lie about the Imperious Curse, and you put Lily and James Potter's son in his house. He loves you, he loves Hadrian Malfoy, a character you invented, a fiction you wrote on my face. Harry's hands were shaking, not with fear, with the effort of keeping his magic leashed. He could feel it surging, responding to the fury and the grief and the bewilderment, and the temporary glamour on his face was already thinning. "You had 11 years to tell me the truth, 11 years. I learned to walk in that house. I learned to talk. I learned to read, to fly, to use magic. I called him father, and you let me. Because you were happy." Narcissa's composure shattered. The tears she'd been holding broke free, not gracefully, not prettily, but in the raw, ugly way of a woman who had finally run out of strength to hold them back. "You were happy, Harry. You were safe and loved, and you had a brother and a family and a home, and the alternative was a cupboard under the stairs in a house full of people who would have despised you. I saw that house. I stood on that street. I held you in my arms, and you were cold, and I decided that you deserved better. Maybe I was wrong, maybe I had no right, but I would make the same choice again. Every time, I would make it again. The room shook, not from Harry's magic, from Narcissa's. Her power was rarely visible. She kept it coiled, controlled, deployed with surgical precision, but in this moment it radiated from her like heat from a furnace, and Harry felt it crash against his own, two enormous forces meeting in the space between a mother and the son she'd stolen. "You should have told me," Harry said. "When I was old enough, 7, 8, 9, you should have sat me down and told me. You should have given me the choice." "I was afraid of what? Of losing you," the words came out broken. "Of watching you look at me the way you're looking at me right now." Harry stared at her, she stared back. And between them, invisible but present, hung 11 years of love, real love, desperate love, the fierce and terrible love of a woman who had burned her life down to keep a child warm. "I need time," Harry said. "Of course, listen, I need time to be angry. I need time to figure out who I am now that I know who I'm not, and I need you to not manage this. Don't smooth it over. Don't strategize. Don't come at me with a plan. Just let me feel this." Narcissa pressed her hand over her mouth, nodded. The tears were still falling, and she wasn't wiping them away, and Harry realized with a jolt that this was the most honest he had ever seen her. "The glamour needs to be restored," Severus said from the far wall. His voice was quiet, neutral, the voice of a man who understood that his role right now was structural, not emotional. "Whatever decisions are made about disclosure, they cannot be made tonight. If Harry walks through the castle with that face, Dumbledore will know within the hour." "I know," Harry said. He turned to Narcissa. "Can you do it, even now?" She stood, straightened, wiped her face with one hand and drew her wand with the other, and the transformation was remarkable. The grief didn't disappear, but it moved behind something harder, something forged, the core of steel that had allowed this woman to maintain a decade-long deception under the noses of Dumbledore and the entire wizarding world. "Come here," she said. Harry walked to her. She raised her wand, and the magic began, familiar, warm, precise. He felt the glamour rebuild itself, layer by layer, his real face retreating behind the constructed one. Black hair lightening to ash blonde, green eyes fading to gray blue. The scar smoothing, vanishing, buried under concealment so deep it might as well not exist. But it did exist, he knew that now, and knowing changed everything. "Mum," Draco said. Everyone turned. Draco was still on the floor, his back against the wall, his knees up. He hadn't moved during the entire conversation. His face was dry, the tears from earlier had dried, and what was left was something pale and still and carefully assembled. "Did Dad know?" he asked. Narcissa hesitated. "I don't lie to me, you've lied enough. Did Father know that Harry is Harry Potter?" The silence was its own answer. "He suspected," Narcissa said finally. "He never asked, he chose not to know. Because knowing would have been inconvenient, because knowing would have been dangerous for all of us." Draco stood up. He brushed off his pajamas with the fastidious precision of someone maintaining their last shred of normalcy and walked to where Harry stood. "I'm still your brother," Draco said, not to Narcissa, to Harry. "I don't care what your name is, I don't care whose blood you have. I chose you when I was 1 year old and too stupid to know any better, and I'm choosing you now. That's final." Harry looked at him, this pale, sharp, impossible boy who had been 3 feet away for every moment of his life, and the tightness in his chest cracked open, and what poured out wasn't grief or anger or confusion. It was gratitude so enormous it felt like drowning. "You're still a ferret," Harry said, "and you're still a hedgehog. We all have our crosses to bear." Harry grabbed Draco's hand, squeezed it once hard. Draco squeezed back. Narcissa watched them and made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob, and Severus looked away, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the cracked mirror as though his life depended on not showing whatever was happening behind his face. "The question now," Severus said, once the silence had settled into something manageable, "is what happens next." Harry released Draco's hand. He turned to face Severus, and his expression was different. The fury banked, the grief shelved, replaced by something colder and more focused. The strategist, the Malfoy-trained mind engaging with a problem that required solutions, not feelings. "What does Dumbledore know?" "He knows Harry Potter's magical signature has been detected in this castle. He does not know whose face it belongs to. The surges during your more dramatic episodes have been consistent with the signature he's been tracking for a decade. The troll, among other instances. Your glamour weakens when your magic surges. The more power you use, the more the real signature bleeds through. So every time I've been showing off, you've been sending up a flare." "Yes," Harry paced, 3 steps left, 3 steps right. The room wasn't big enough for proper pacing, but the movement helped him think. "Options," he said. "You could stop using magic conspicuously. I expected as much. Alternatively, your mother could modify the glamour to better contain the signature during surges." Narcissa shook her head. "I've already pushed the glamour to its limits. The problem isn't the spell work, it's him. His magical core is too powerful. It overwhelms the containment during high-output moments. The more he grows, the worse it'll get. Then we need a different approach, Harry said. Not containment, misdirection. Severus raised an eyebrow. Explain. Dumbledore is looking for a magical signature. He has instruments calibrated to it. Every time I surge, the instruments react. But what if the instruments can't pinpoint the source? What if the signature appears to come from multiple locations simultaneously? A diffusion ward, Narcissa said slowly. Spread the signature across the castle so it can't be traced to a single person. Can you do it? It would require embedding ward anchors throughout the school. Dozens of them in secret. Mum, can you do it? Narcissa looked at him, this boy who had just had his world destroyed and was already rebuilding it, already strategizing, already turning a catastrophe into a chess problem. The pride in her eyes was luminous. I can do it, she said. It will take time, weeks perhaps, but yes, do it. Start tonight. Harry, and I need to know about the third-floor corridor. There's a three-headed dog guarding a trapdoor. What's down there? The room went very still. Severus and Narcissa exchanged a look, brief, loaded, the kind of communication that only exists between people who have been keeping secrets together for a very long time. Philosopher's Stone, Severus said. Nicholas Flamel's creation. It produces the elixir of life, immortality in liquid form. Dumbledore moved it here from Gringotts at the start of term. There was a break-in attempt over the summer. Someone's trying to steal it. Someone is trying to steal it. Quirrell. Severus's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. What makes you say that? He's the only person in this castle wearing a mask thicker than mine. The stutter is fake. The nervousness is performance. And every time I'm near him, my forehead, Harry stopped, touched the place where his scar was hidden. Something hurts right here like a signal. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. This wasn't the silence of revelation or grief. This was the silence of people who were very afraid and very good at hiding it. The scar, Narcissa whispered. The scar hurts near Quirrell. Since the first night, the feast, it's worse in his classroom. Severus pushed off the wall. His face had gone from guarded to urgent, a shift so dramatic that it remade his entire bearing, the languid academic disappearing and something sharper, more dangerous taking its place. Narcissa, the scar is a curse wound. If it reacts to Quirrell, it's reacting to what Quirrell is carrying. Carrying, what's he carrying? Severus looked at Harry, the Dark Lord. The words fell into the room like stones into water. No, Narcissa said. He's dead. He died. He didn't die. He was destroyed, diminished, reduced to less than a ghost. But he didn't die. Dumbledore believes he survived as a shade, a fragment, capable of possessing the living. Severus's voice was clinical, precise, the voice of a man delivering intelligence, not opinions. Quirrell spent a year traveling abroad, Albania. The Dark Lord's shade was rumored to have fled there after his fall. If Quirrell encountered him, if he was weak enough or willing enough to be possessed, then Voldemort is in this castle, Harry said. Attached to the back of a defense professor's head. Yes, Draco made a noise. It was small and strangled and sounded like someone had stepped on a cat. I'm sorry, the Dark Lord, the actual Dark Lord, is inside a teacher in our school where we sleep. Correct, and nobody thought to mention this. Dumbledore is aware. He is, in his inimitable fashion, allowing the situation to develop. Allowing it to, he's letting a possessed teacher wander around a school full of children. Dumbledore believes the stone is sufficiently protected and that Quirrell will eventually make his move, at which point Dumbledore will intervene. He's using the stone as bait. That's insane, Draco said. That's Dumbledore, Severus replied. Harry had stopped pacing. He was standing in the center of the room, perfectly still, his arms at his sides, and the expression on his glamoured face was one that none of them had seen before. Not anger, not fear, not the cold calculation of strategy. It was hunger. Voldemort killed my parents, Harry said. Harry, Narcissa started. He murdered my father. He murdered my mother. He tried to kill me, and now he's living in the back of a man's skull 50 feet from where I eat breakfast. Harry's voice was quiet, controlled. The kind of controlled that meant the control was the only thing standing between him and something enormous. And Dumbledore, the man who left me on a doorstep, is using the stone as bait, playing games, moving pieces, treating this castle like a chessboard and every person in it like a pawn. That is an accurate summary, Severus said carefully. I'm going to destroy him, Dumbledore, Voldemort. Harry looked at Severus with eyes that should have been green, that were green underneath, burning with a fire the glamour couldn't fully suppress. He doesn't get to come back. He doesn't get a second chance. He murdered my parents, and I ended him once, and I'll end him again. You were 15 months old. You didn't end him, your mother's sacrifice. I don't care about the mechanism. I care about the result. He's here, I'm here, and I'm not afraid of him. The room was vibrating, not visibly, subsonically, at a frequency that lived in the bones rather than the ears. Harry's magic was compressed, dense, enormous, filling the space like water filling a tank, and the glamour on his face was holding only because Narcissa's spell work was extraordinary and Harry's will was iron. "You're 11, Narcissa said. Her voice was shaking. "You're an 11-year-old boy." "I'm an 11-year-old boy who threw a mountain troll across a corridor without trying. I'm an 11-year-old boy who held off 4 fifth years without a wand. I'm the boy who lived, Mum, and I've been raised by Malfoys and trained by Severus Snape, and I have more raw power than anyone in this castle except maybe Dumbledore himself. If you think I'm going to sit in my dormitory while the thing that killed my parents squats in my school, you don't know me at all." Narcissa opened her mouth, closed it. Looked at Severus for help and found none. Severus was watching Harry with an expression that mixed horror and something else, something fierce and reluctant and unmistakable. Recognition. He was seeing Lily. "The boy is right," Severus said quietly. "Severus, not about rushing in, not about confrontation, but about the fundamental reality of the situation. The Dark Lord is here, he is after the stone, and if he obtains it, he will return to full power, and the first person he will seek out is the child who destroyed him. Harry cannot hide from this. Running from it merely ensures he faces it unprepared. Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we prepare him." Narcissa looked between Severus and Harry, two faces, both resolute, both dangerous in different ways, and she made a choice. Not the choice she wanted to make, the choice that reality demanded. "If we do this," she said, "we do it intelligently, no charging in, no heroics. We gather information, we make a plan, and we execute it with precision." "Agreed," Harry said, "and you listen to Severus. In all things related to the Dark Lord and quarrel, Severus is your commanding officer. You do not deviate, you do not improvise, you do not go rogue." "Conditionally agreed. There are no conditions, Harry. There's always one condition. If someone's life is in danger, I act. No committee, no planning, I act." Narcissa stared at him. And then slowly she nodded, because she'd raised this boy, she knew his heart, and arguing with it was like arguing with gravity. "Draco," she said, "you are not to be involved in this." "Absolutely not," Draco said. "I'm involved, Draco. Harry is my brother. This is my fight. You are 11 years old and you are not equipped. Then equip me, teach me, give me tools, but don't you dare sideline me while Harry walks into something like this alone." The Malfoy stubbornness, genuine this time, not performed, set Draco's jaw at exactly the angle Narcissa's set at in moments of immovable determination. She recognized it. She'd created it. "Fine," she said, "but behind Harry, always behind Harry. And if I tell you to run, you run." "Agreed." Narcissa looked at the ceiling as though asking it for patience. "I need to start on those diffusion wards. Severus, keep Dumbledore away from him. Whatever it takes, that has been my assignment for the past 2 months. Make it your priority." She crossed to Harry, placed both hands on his face, the glamoured face, the constructed one, and tilted it up so their eyes met. "I love you," she said. "Whatever you decide about me, whatever you feel about what I've done, I love you, and that was never a lie." Harry looked at her, the woman who had taken him, the woman who had raised him, the woman who had given him everything except the truth. "I know," he said, "I need time, but I know." She kissed his forehead, right on the scar she'd hidden for 11 years. Then she turned, pulled her composure around her like armor, and left the room with Severus at her side. The door closed, the wards shimmered, and Harry and Draco stood alone in the wreckage, and the night pressed in around them, and the future was a dark country with no map. "Bed," Draco said, "bed." They walked back to the dungeons in silence. The castle was dark and still around them, its ancient magic humming at a frequency that Harry could feel in his bones. He pressed his hand against the stone wall as they passed, and the wall was warm. The castle knew. He was sure of it now. Hogwarts had known who he was the moment he stepped off the boat, and it had been watching, waiting, nudging him toward the truth with the patient persistence of something very old and very wise. He pulled his hand away and followed Draco through the common room entrance and into the dormitory, and they lay in their beds in the dark, and neither of them slept. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in compartmentalization. On the surface, nothing changed. Harry attended classes, ate meals, studied in the library, maintained the social network he and Draco had built. The glamour held, the mask held. Hadrian Malfoy walked through Hogwarts with the same confidence and power he'd always carried, and no one, not the students, not most of the teachers, not Dumbledore, saw anything different. Underneath, everything was in motion. Narcissa, operating from the 3 broomsticks and later through a series of secret visits facilitated by Severus, began embedding diffusion ward anchors throughout the castle. Tiny runic stones, no larger than a thumbnail, pressed into the mortar between bricks in corridors, under staircases, behind paintings. Each one would resonate with Harry's magical signature during surges, creating ghost echoes that would scatter across Dumbledore's instruments like static. It was painstaking, brilliant work, and Narcissa performed it with the tireless precision of a woman who understood that her son's life depended on her craftsmanship. Severus began teaching Harry in earnest, not the curriculum. Harry was already ahead of the curriculum in every subject except potions, where he remained cheerfully mediocre. Severus taught him combat magic, dueling theory, shield charms that could stop a killing curse in theory. No one had ever tested it. Counter curses. And most importantly, occlumency. Dumbledore is a legilimens of the highest order, Severus told him during their first real lesson held in Severus's private office with wards thick enough to block a siege. He does not need to ask questions, he reads the answers directly. Eye contact is sufficient. A moment's inattention is sufficient. If you face him without occlumency shields, he will know everything. Then teach me. I intend to clear your mind. Of what? Everything, Harry tried. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. His mind was a hurricane of identity crisis, strategic planning, suppressed fury, and the constant low-level vibration of power that he'd never been able to fully quiet. Clearing it was impossible. You're not clearing, Severus observed. You're fighting. Stop fighting. The mind is not a battlefield, it's a room. You don't defeat intrusions. You rearrange the furniture so there's nothing to find. That's the worst metaphor I've ever heard. It's the one that works. Try again. It took 2 weeks before Harry could maintain basic shields. 3 weeks before he could hold them under direct legilimency assault from Severus, whose mental probes were surgical and relentless and hurt like having an ice pick driven behind your eyes. But Harry was a fast learner, faster than Severus expected, faster than anyone had a right to be at 11. By late November, his shields were solid enough that Severus pronounced them adequate, which from me is the equivalent of a standing ovation. And Harry could feel the difference. Dumbledore's twinkling glances no longer penetrated, they slid off him like water off glass, and the headmaster's expression when this happened shifted from benevolent to curious to something that looked almost like frustration. Good, let him be frustrated. Harry had no sympathy for the man who'd left a baby on a doorstep and spent a decade pretending it was a kindness. Meanwhile, Harry and Draco investigated the Philosopher's Stone, not the stone itself. They had no interest in stealing it or destroying it. What they investigated was the security. Hogwarts rumor had it that the stone was protected by a series of challenges created by various professors, each designed to test a different skill. If Voldemort was going to make a move, he'd need to get past all of them. Harry wanted to know what all of them looked like. Draco handled the intelligence gathering. He was better at it than Harry, subtler, more patient, more willing to play the long game of social manipulation that extracted information without revealing interest. Over the course of 3 weeks, through a combination of overheard staff conversations, strategic friendships with upper-year Slytherins who had access to restricted areas, and one spectacularly brazen session of eavesdropping outside the staff room using an extendable ear borrowed from a pair of Gryffindor twins named Weasley, Draco paid 3 galleons and never spoke of the transaction again. They assembled a rough map of the protections. The 3-headed dog, a devil's snare, flying keys. A giant chess set, a troll, a logic puzzle, and something at the end, something Dumbledore himself had placed, which no one seemed to know the details of. 7 challenges, Draco said, laying out his notes on Harry's bed while the rest of the dormitory slept. 7 professors, 7 obstacles. Quirrell already knows about most of them. He contributed the troll for Merlin's sake. The only one he doesn't know is whatever Dumbledore put at the end. Then that's where we stop him. Harry, we don't even know what Dumbledore's protection is. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's designed to stop someone. I just need to be there when Quirrell reaches it. You're planning to fight the Dark Lord in a basement. I'm planning to be in a position to act when the opportunity arises. That's different. It's really not. But Draco didn't argue further because he'd learned over 11 years and change that arguing with Harry about things Harry had decided was like arguing with weather. You could object all you liked, but it was still going to rain. December came. Snow blanketed the grounds. The lake froze. Students bundled themselves in scarves and talked about Christmas, and Harry watched them with the detached awareness of someone living 2 lives simultaneously. The visible one, all exams and Quidditch and holiday preparations, and the invisible one, all wards and combat training and the slow, ticking approach of a confrontation that felt inevitable. The scar ached more frequently now. Not just near Quirrell at night, in dreams, in moments of stillness. Harry would be sitting in the common room and feel it pulse, a dull, hot throb that radiated outward from a point on his forehead that shouldn't exist, and he'd press his fingers to the spot and feel nothing because the glamour was too thick. Quirrell was getting bolder. Not in class. In class, he was the same stuttering fool, the same performance. But Harry tracked him. watched his movements, noted the pattern. Quirrell was spending more and more time near the third-floor corridor, lingering in adjacent hallways, and once Harry saw this himself, concealed in an alcove past curfew, Quirrell stood outside the forbidden door and spoke in a low, fluent voice that didn't stutter at all. "Not yet, master. The protections, I need more time," and a second voice, thin and cold and coming from inside Quirrell's turban, had answered. "Time is a luxury we are running out of, Quirrell. The stone, get me the stone." Harry had pressed himself into the alcove and held his breath and felt his scar scream, and the magic inside him had roared in response, recognition, fury, the primal resonance of a connection forged on the night his parents died. Voldemort, right there, 20 feet away, living like a parasite on the back of a coward's head. He wanted to step out, wanted to face it then and there in the dark corridor with nothing but his wand and his power and 11 years of rage. He didn't. Because Narcissa had asked him to be intelligent, and Severus had asked him to be strategic, and Draco had asked him to come back alive. So he stayed in the alcove and he memorized the sound of that cold, thin voice, and he added it to the box in his mind alongside everything else. Soon, but not yet, Christmas break came and went. Harry and Draco stayed at Hogwarts, Harry because he wasn't ready to face Lucius Malfoy with the knowledge he now carried, and Draco because he refused to leave Harry alone. Narcissa sent gifts, new robes for both boys, a rare potions ingredient set for Draco, and for Harry a small package wrapped in silver paper that contained a cloak. Not just any cloak, a cloak that, when Harry put it on, made his body disappear entirely. The note attached was in Narcissa's handwriting. "This belonged to your father. It was in my possession. I should have given it to you years ago. Use it wisely." Harry stood in the empty dormitory on Christmas morning, invisible from the neck down, holding the cloak that James Potter had worn, and something cracked inside him that he'd been trying to hold together. Not the fury that was banked, stored, useful, something softer, something that ached, his father's cloak, his real father. The man he'd never known, who had died without a wand in his hand, trying to buy time for his wife and son. Harry folded the cloak carefully, put it in his trunk, and went to find Draco. They spent Christmas Day playing chess. Draco won. Exploring the castle under the invisibility cloak, they found a kitchen staffed entirely by house elves who were almost hysterical with eagerness to feed them, and not talking about the things that were too big to fit into words. It was the best Christmas of Harry's life, and the worst, and somehow both at once. The break came in spring, March. The days were getting longer, the grounds thawing, the castle shaking off winter's grip. Students were deep in revision for end-of-year exams. The Philosopher's Stone was still safe behind its 7 protections, and Quirrell was getting desperate. Harry could feel it, the escalation, the shift in the air around the defense professor. Quirrell's stutter was slipping more frequently now, his eyes harder, his movements more purposeful. He was nearly ready, and the voice under the turban was pushing. Severus felt it too. He doubled the frequency of his patrols near the third-floor corridor and started sleeping in his office instead of his quarters. During their Tuesday training session, he was tenser than Harry had ever seen him, sharp, distracted, casting and recasting diagnostic spells on Harry's glamour with the obsessive focus of a man checking his parachute before a jump. "It's coming," Harry said. Severus didn't insult him by asking what. "Soon. Dumbledore has been called to the ministry, an urgent summons. I believe Quirrell engineered it. To get Dumbledore out of the castle. Yes. When? Tonight, most likely. Dumbledore leaves at 7. Harry looked at Severus. The man looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his face thinner than it had been in September, the strain of maintaining 4 different loyalties simultaneously carving lines into his skin. "You can't come with me," Harry said. "I beg your pardon. If you're seen going through the trapdoor, your cover is blown. Dumbledore thinks you're his spy. The remaining Death Eaters think you're their ally. If you're caught protecting Harry Potter's body from Voldemort, both sides know where you stand. I won't do that to you. You are not going alone. I'm going with Draco. That is categorically worse. Draco knows the challenges. We've mapped them. He's the strategist. I'm the firepower. It's how we work." Severus gripped the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles went white. "You are 11 years old. Everyone keeps saying that. It doesn't make me less powerful. Power is not wisdom. Number, but it's what I've got, and it's enough." Severus stared at him. And Harry saw the war behind those dark eyes, the protector fighting the pragmatist, the man who loved Lily's son fighting the spy who understood that assets had to be deployed where they were most effective. "If you die," Severus said quietly, "your mother will kill me, and then she will find a way to resurrect you, and she will kill you too. Then I'd better not die. You'd better not." Severus released the desk, straightened, drew his wand and cast something, a complex, layered enchantment that settled over Harry's glamour like a second skin. "Reinforcement," he said. "It won't hold if you fully unleash, but it will buy you time." And he hesitated. Then he reached into his robes and pulled out a small glass vial filled with golden liquid. Essence of Dittany, for wounds, keep it on you. Harry took the vial. Thank you, don't thank me, come back alive. Harry left the office. The corridors were bright with spring sunlight, students moving in laughing groups toward the great hall for dinner. He found Draco in the common room. Tonight, Harry said. Draco looked up from his transfiguration essay. His face went still. Then he set down his quill, rolled up the essay, and stood. I'll get our cloaks, he said. They went at midnight. The invisibility cloak covered them both, a tight fit, their shoulders pressed together, their footsteps synchronized through years of practice. The castle was dark and quiet, the corridors empty, the paintings snoring in their frames. Dumbledore was gone. Severus was maintaining a visible presence in the dungeons, establishing his alibi. The stage was set, the third-floor corridor, the forbidden door. Harry dissolved the lock with a wave of his hand and pushed the door open, and the three-headed dog was already awake, all 6 eyes locking onto the space where 2 invisible boys stood. Fluffy, Draco whispered. The gamekeeper's dog, it sleeps when it hears music. I don't have an instrument, you have magic, improvise. Harry pulled off the cloak, stepped forward and held out his hand, not in surrender, in command. His magic flowed outward, and he shaped it as he shaped everything, through pure intent. The air began to vibrate. A note emerged, low, resonant, humming from the walls and the floor and the air itself. Not a melody, a frequency. The same frequency the castle hummed at, the deep, old song of Hogwarts' ancient magic. The three-headed dog blinked. All 3 sets of eyes went heavy. One head drooped, then another, then the third. Within 30 seconds, the creature was asleep, its massive body folding onto the floor like a collapsing tent. The trapdoor was beneath its paw. Draco pulled it open while Harry maintained the humming, and they dropped through, one after the other, into darkness. Devil's snare caught them. The plant's tendrils wrapped around Harry's legs, his arms, his chest pulling tight with a strength that was impressive for a vegetable. Draco panicked briefly, humanly, before remembering the counter. Light, it hates light. Harry didn't bother with lumos. He generated fire. Real fire, burning white-hot from his open palm, flooding the chamber with light so intense that the devil's snare didn't just recoil, it shriveled. Charred tendrils fell away from them, and they dropped through to a stone floor below. Subtle, Draco said, brushing ash from his robes. Effective. The flying keys were next. A broomstick waited against the wall, and 100 winged keys fluttered in the air above a locked door. One of them was the right one, old, silver, with a bent wing. I see it, Draco said, the big silver one with the damaged wing. Harry didn't take the broom. He extended his hand, focused, and called the key. It resisted, charmed to evade, to dodge, to flee, but Harry's magic was an ocean, and the key's charm was a paper boat. It flew to his palm, struggling, its wings beating against his fingers. He jammed it into the lock, turned it, and the door opened. The chess set was enormous. Life-sized pieces carved from black and white stone, arranged on a board that filled the entire room. They stepped onto the board, and the white pieces turned to face them. This is McGonagall's, Draco said. His eyes were bright, not with fear but with excitement. He was in his element, strategy, logic, the game within the game. I play black, Harry, take the bishop's square. Draco, we don't have time for, trust me. Harry took the bishop's square. Draco directed the pieces with the calm, rapid-fire authority of someone who had been playing chess since age 4 and had never once lost to anyone under 30. The game was vicious. The white pieces showed no mercy, smashing through black pawns with stone swords that sent rubble flying, but Draco was better, faster, 3 moves ahead at every turn. Knight to h3, bishop takes, no, wait, castle. Draco's eyes were narrowed, his mind moving at a speed that Harry could feel even without legilimency. Harry moved to the queen's flank. I'm going to sacrifice the rook. To do what? To win. Move. Harry moved. Draco sacrificed his rook, let the white queen smash it to rubble, and in the space that opened, slid his remaining knight into position. Checkmate. The white king dropped his crown. The pieces moved aside. The door opened. Draco was grinning, flushed, breathing hard, alive with the victory. McGonagall's a genius, but she left her queen too aggressive. Classic overextension. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The troll room was next, but the troll was already unconscious, lying on its side in a puddle of drool, a lump the size of a melon on its forehead. Someone had already been through. Quirrell, Harry said, he's ahead of us. They ran. The logic puzzle was Severus's contribution. A table of potions, a riddle in verse, and a wall of purple fire blocking the way forward. Draco read the riddle twice, eyes flicking between the bottles with the rapid calculation of someone cross-referencing variables. This one, he said, picking up the smallest bottle. It gets you through the fire, but there's only enough for one. Harry looked at the bottle, then at Draco. "Go back," he said. "Number, Draco. There's only enough for one. Go back, find Severus, tell him Quirrell is through." "I said number, and I said go back." Harry took Draco's shoulders and looked him in the eye. "This is the part where I go forward and you stay alive. That was the deal. The deal was we do this together. The deal was you stay behind me, and behind me right now is back there." Harry squeezed his shoulders. "You got me through the chess set. You got us here. Now let me do what I'm good at." Draco's face was a war zone: anger, fear, pride, love, and the terrible understanding that Harry was right. He couldn't follow through the flames, and what waited on the other side was not a puzzle or a game, but something ancient and evil and specifically interested in killing Harry Potter. "Come back," Draco said, his voice cracked. "Promise me. I'm a Malfoy. We always come back. We're like cockroaches. That's the worst pep talk in history." "I know." Harry pulled Draco into a hug. "Quick, fierce, hard enough to bruise. Go, find Severus. I'll be right behind you." Draco pulled away. He looked at Harry one more time, memorizing, cataloging, the way he'd done in the classroom the night the glamour broke. Then he turned, grabbed the bottle that would take him back through the other fire, drank it, and walked through the purple flames without looking back. Harry was alone. He drank the forward potion. The flames washed over him, cold, strange, tingling, and he stepped through into the final chamber. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror of Arist. Not the cracked one from the classroom. This was the same mirror, moved here, repaired, standing whole and tall in the center of a stone chamber lit by torches. Quirrell had his turban off, and Harry could see the back of his head, and what was there made his stomach lurch. A face, pressed into Quirrell's skull like a mask pushed into clay, white flat with red eyes that glowed like embers and a mouth that was little more than a slit. Voldemort. The scar exploded. Not the dull ache, not the warning throb, a full detonation of pain that whited out Harry's vision and drove him to one knee. He gasped, pressed his hand to his forehead, and felt the glamour crack along the scar line, the concealment splitting open under the pressure of the dark magic resonating between them. Quirrell turned. His eyes, his own eyes, not the red ones on the back of his head, went wide. "You," he breathed, no stutter, no performance, just shock. How did you get past?" "Move away from the mirror," Harry said. He was on his feet. The pain was enormous, but he'd been raised by Narcissa Malfoy and trained by Severus Snape, and pain was something you worked through, not something you surrendered to. Quirrell stared at him. Then slowly he smiled, and the smile was wrong, inhabited, the expression of two minds pulling a single face in different directions. "Let me speak to him," said the voice from the back of Quirrell's head. Quirrell turned, presenting the face in his skull, and Voldemort looked at Harry with red eyes that held a millennium of malice and a very specific, very personal recognition. "Harry Potter," Voldemort whispered, "I thought I recognized the scent of your magic, hiding in plain sight all this time, under a Malfoy's face no less. Narcissa always was the clever one." Harry's glamour was dissolving. The scar was visible now, blazing on his forehead, and his hair was darkening at the roots, and his eyes were shifting, gray bleeding to green in real time, the constructed face peeling away under the force of the connection between them. He let it go, all of it. Let the glamour fall, let his real face emerge, let the black hair and green eyes and lightning bolt scar announce to the chamber what the whole world had been wondering for a decade. Harry Potter stood in front of Lord Voldemort, and he was not hiding. "You killed my parents," Harry said. "I killed a great many people's parents. You'll have to be more specific." James and Lily Potter, October 31, 1981. "You murdered them in their home, and then you tried to murder me, and it didn't work." Voldemort's slit mouth twisted. "A temporary setback, one I intend to correct." Quirrell seized the boy. Quirrell lunged. His hands reached for Harry's throat, and they connected, fingers closing around his neck, nails digging in, and then Quirrell screamed. His hands blistered. The skin where he touched Harry erupted in burns, angry red, spreading up his fingers and across his palms as though Harry's skin were made of acid. Quirrell staggered back, staring at his ruined hands, and the scream went on and on. The protection, Lily's protection. 11 years old and still burning in Harry's blood, still annihilating anything that carried Voldemort's taint. Harry didn't hesitate. He charged. Not with magic, with his body, his hands, the weapon that Quirrell couldn't defend against. He grabbed Quirrell's face, both palms flat against the man's cheeks, and the burning intensified, Quirrell's skin cracking, flaking, turning to ash under Harry's fingers. Quirrell thrashed, screamed, clawed at Harry's arms, but everywhere he touched, his own flesh burned. "Kill him," Voldemort shrieked from the back of the disintegrating skull. "Kill him, you fool," but Quirrell couldn't. He was coming apart. His body was failing, crumbling, the dark magic that had sustained his possession, no match for the love that had been seared into Harry's blood on the night Lily Potter died. Harry held on. The pain in his scar was beyond anything he'd ever experienced, a white-hot wire running from his forehead through his brain to the base of his skull, but he held on because his mother had held on. Both of them, Lily, who had died rather than step aside, Narcissa, who had held a cold baby to her chest and refused to put him down. Both of them had held on, and he was their son, both of theirs, and he would not let go. Quirrell collapsed. His body hit the stone floor and began to disintegrate, skin turning to ash, muscle to dust, bone to chalk. Face on the back of his skull screamed, a sound that existed outside the range of human hearing, felt in the magic rather than the ears, and then something tore free. A dark shape, formless, shrieking, ripping itself from the dying host and swirling upward. Voldemort's shade, the wraith, diminished, weakened, barely a whisper of the force it had once been. It hung in the air above Quirrell's remains and looked at Harry with red eyes that burned with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. Harry raised his wand. Holly and Phoenix Feather, the brother of the Dark Lord's wand, it was singing in his hand, a high, fierce note, not a warning but a war cry. "You won't come back," Harry said. "I won't let you," the shade screamed. It hurled itself at Harry, a last, desperate assault, formless dark magic slamming into him like a wall of ice. Harry felt it hit his shields, felt it clawed his mind, felt the scar burn so hot he thought his skull would split. He pushed back, not with a spell, with everything. Every ounce of power, every layer of fury and grief and love and defiance, compressed into a single burst of raw magic that erupted from his core and his wand simultaneously. The chamber filled with light, not golden white, pure, blinding, absolute. The light hit the shade and the shade shrieked, and Harry could feel it tearing, fragmenting, pieces of dark magic shredding under the assault like cobwebs in a hurricane. But it didn't die. The shade was too fragmented, too diffuse, pieces of it scattered, slipping through cracks in the stone, fleeing into the walls, into the earth, into the dark places of the world where broken things go to hide. Harry felt them go and knew, with a certainty that lived in his scar, that Voldemort was not destroyed, diminished. Scattered, driven further from life than he had been since 1981, but not dead, not yet. The light faded, the chamber settled. Quirrell's remains were ash and dust, scattered across the stone floor. The mirror of Eris stood intact, unmarked, showing Harry his own reflection, his real reflection, black-haired and green-eyed, standing alone in the chamber with his wand raised and his scar bleeding. Harry lowered his wand, his legs buckled. The floor came up to meet him, cold stone against his cheek, and the last thing he saw before the darkness took him was his own face in the mirror, and behind it, smiling, the ghosts of two parents he would never know. He thought he heard his mother's voice. He wasn't sure which one. "You did well, Harry. Rest now." He closed his eyes. Chapter 5. Neither one nor the other. Harry woke up in the hospital wing to the sound of arguing. Not quiet, diplomatic disagreement, full-throated, barely controlled arguing, the kind that vibrated through walls and made the potions bottles on Madame Pomfrey's shelves rattle in their racks. He recognized the voices before he opened his eyes. Narcissa, cold, precise, every word a scalpel. Dumbledore, calm, measured, infuriatingly patient. Severus, low, tight, the voice of a man holding himself together with his fingernails. And Draco, loud, very loud. "Will not let you take him, you deranged, manipulative, lemon-drop-sucking. Mr. Malfoy, I assure you, no one is taking anyone. You left HIM on a doorstep. You don't get to assure me of anything, Draco." Narcissa's voice, sharp as glass. "Sit down." "I will not sit down." Draco Lucius Malfoy, sit down. Silence, the scrape of a chair. Draco sitting down with the furious compliance of someone who was obeying the letter of the command while violating its spirit with every fiber of his being. Harry opened his eyes. The hospital wing was bright with morning sunlight. He was in a bed near the window, buried under a truly excessive number of blankets, and his body felt like it had been taken apart and reassembled by someone who'd lost the instructions. Everything ached. His scar, visible, he realized with a jolt, blazing on his forehead with no glamour to hide it, throbbed in time with his heartbeat. The arguing parties were clustered at the far end of the room, near Madame Pomfrey's office. Narcissa stood with her back to the wall, positioned like a general defending a hill, Draco beside her, practically vibrating with rage, his wand visible in his hand, despite the fact that he was in a room with several adults. Severus flanked Narcissa's other side, arms folded, his face a death mask. And opposite them, seated in a conjured armchair with his hands folded in his lap and his blue eyes grave behind his half-moon spectacles, was Albus Dumbledore. Between them, standing rigid and pale with his walking stick gripped like a weapon, was Lucius Malfoy. Harry's stomach dropped. Lucius, here, which meant Lucius knew. "He's awake," Madame Pomfrey said from somewhere behind Harry, and every head in the room turned. The silence that followed was extraordinary. 6 pairs of eyes on Harry, each carrying a different weight, a different need, a different version of who they thought he was. He looked back at them from the hospital bed, his black hair a mess against the white pillow, his green eyes vivid in the morning light, the lightning bolt scar and accusation written on his forehead. "Morning," he said. Draco was out of his chair like a shot. He crossed the room in 4 strides and grabbed Harry's hand, and his grip was so tight it was almost painful. "You absolute idiot," Draco said. His voice cracked on the last word. "You nearly died. Pomfrey said your magical core was almost drained. Another minute and you would have, you idiot." "Good morning to you too, Draco. Don't be glib. I had to sit here for 3 days while you were unconscious, and I swear on Salazar's grave, if you ever do something like that again, 3 days. Harry sat up, the room tilted. He grabbed the headboard and waited for the vertigo to pass. "I was out for 3 days. "Magical exhaustion," Madame Pomfrey said crisply, bustling past with a tray of potions. "Near total core depletion. You're lucky you're alive, young man. Whatever you did down there pushed your magic past every safe threshold that exists. I fought Voldemort." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Madame Pomfrey flinched. Draco's grip tightened. Lucius went, if possible, even paler. Only Dumbledore and Narcissa didn't react, Dumbledore because he'd known, and Narcissa because she'd spent 11 years preparing for worse. "Yes," Dumbledore said, rising from his chair. "You did, and we have a great deal to discuss." "You're not discussing anything with my son," Narcissa said. "With respect, Narcissa, the situation has moved beyond. With respect, Headmaster, you lost the right to determine what happens to this child the night you left him on a doorstep in November. That decision was made to activate the blood protection. That decision was made because it was convenient, because you wanted him hidden and controlled and available when you needed him, like a weapon stored in a cupboard." Narcissa stepped forward and her magic, usually invisible, usually coiled, pressed outward, filling the room with a cold, electric charge that made the hair on Harry's arms stand up. "You didn't protect him. You stored him. And now you want him back because he's useful again." Dumbledore's expression shifted. The grandfatherly warmth dimmed, and beneath it, Harry caught a glimpse of something else, the real Dumbledore, the one who had defeated Grindelwald and orchestrated the war against Voldemort and run Wizarding Britain from behind the scenes for 50 years. Not a kindly old man, a power broker, a strategist, a man who moved people like pieces on a board and called it love. "Narcissa," Dumbledore said, and his voice was quieter now, more dangerous. "You kidnapped Harry Potter. You concealed him from the wizarding world for a decade. You placed him in the home of a known Death Eater. Don't you dare," Narcissa's voice could have frozen the lake, "don't you dare stand in this room and lecture me about the safety of my son while you let Voldemort walk the corridors of this school for an entire year. You knew, Severus told me you knew Quirrell was possessed and you let him teach children. You used the stone as bait. You turned this school into a trap and you gambled with every student in it, including Harry. The protections were sufficient. The protections failed. A first-year, my son, an 11-year-old boy, had to do what you should have done in September. He faced the Dark Lord because you were too busy playing chess to do your job." The room was vibrating. Narcissa's magic and Dumbledore's were pressing against each other, 2 enormous forces meeting in the narrow space of the hospital wing, and the air between them shimmered with the strain. Harry got out of bed. His legs were shaky. His core was depleted. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean, running on fumes and willpower, but he stood and the room shifted subtly, instinctively, to orient around him. Because whatever he'd been before he went under that trapdoor, he was something different now. Something that demanded attention by simply existing. "Everyone stop," he said. They stopped, not because of magic, because of his voice. Flat calm, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with authority. "I'm not a chess piece," Harry said. "I'm not a weapon. I'm not a political asset or a symbol or a prophecy. I'm a person, and every single adult in this room has, at one point or another, decided what's best for me without asking me. That stops now." He looked at Dumbledore. "You left me on a doorstep. I was 15 months old, and you left me in the cold with people who would have hated me. You didn't check on me. You didn't visit. You set up your blood wards and walked away, and if my mother hadn't taken me, I would have grown up in a cupboard under the stairs, abused and ignorant and alone. You don't get to lecture anyone about my welfare." Dumbledore opened his mouth. Harry kept going. "You knew Voldemort was in this castle. You knew Quirrell was possessed. You set a trap using an object that grants immortality as bait in a building full of children, and you waited. For what? For Voldemort to make his move. For some student to stumble into the path and become a hero. For me." Harry's eyes were bright, green, vivid, burning with an intensity that the glamour had never fully suppressed. "Did you know I was here? Before the troll, before any of it, did you know?" Dumbledore was silent for a long time. The twinkle was gone. What was left was an old man's face, etched with exhaustion and something that might have been regret or might have been the discomfort of being seen clearly for the first time. I suspected, Dumbledore said. My instruments detected Harry Potter's magical signature within the castle from the first day of term. I could not identify the source. The glamour, your mother's work was extraordinarily thorough. He glanced at Narcissa. I had narrowed the possibilities to several students, but I could not confirm. And if you had confirmed, what would you have done? I would have spoken with you privately to determine your situation and your wishes. You would have tried to take me back to the Dursleys, to your blood wards, to your plan. The blood wards were essential for your protection. The blood wards protected a doorstep. My mother protected me. Harry turned to Lucius. He hadn't spoken yet, the Malfoy patriarch, the Death Eater, the man Harry had called father for 11 years. Lucius stood between the two factions with his walking stick in a white-knuckled grip and his face arranged in an expression of aristocratic composure that was cracking at every seam. You knew, Harry said. Lucius's jaw tightened. I did not, you suspected. You chose not to ask. That's not ignorance, that's complicity. Everything I did was to protect this family. You served the man who murdered my parents. You stood in his inner circle. You wore his mark. Harry's voice was still level, still controlled, but beneath the control was something vast and hot. And when my mother brought me home and put me in a crib next to your son, you didn't ask questions because having Harry Potter in your house was an asset. Even if you didn't know exactly what I was, you knew I was something, and you kept me because it served you. Lucius flinched. It was small, a contraction of the muscles around his eyes, the barest tightening of his grip on the walking stick, but Harry saw it, and in that flinch was the confirmation of everything. I won't pretend otherwise, Lucius said. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual polish. I am not a good man, Hadrian, Harry, whatever you wish to be called. I have done things that cannot be forgiven, and I have avoided truths that should have been faced. But he stopped, swallowed. The walking stick trembled in his hand. You are my son. You have been my son for 11 years. That may mean nothing to you now, but it meant something to me. It meant everything to me. Harry looked at him, and the fury in his chest warred with something else, something complicated and tender and infuriating, because Lucius Malfoy was not a good man. He was a bigot and a coward and a Death Eater, and he had also taught Harry to fly a broomstick, and attended every one of his childhood performances, and sat at the head of the dinner table every night for a decade, and called Harry his son with a conviction that, whatever its origins, had become genuine. People were complicated. Harry was learning that. I need time, Harry said to Lucius, to all of them. I need time to decide what all of this means, and while I'm deciding, no one makes choices for me. Not about where I live, not about who I am, not about what happens next. He turned to Dumbledore. That includes you. Dumbledore studied him. Those blue eyes, so famous for their twinkle, were serious and sharp, and Harry felt the barest brush of legilimency against his shields, delicate, almost polite, like a knock on a door. Harry's occlumency walls held. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose fractionally. You've been taught to shield your mind, Dumbledore said. I've been taught a great many things. By Severus, I presume. Severus, from his position against the wall, said nothing. His face was a fortress. By people who cared enough to prepare me, Harry said, which is more than you did. The words landed. Dumbledore absorbed them the way a mountain absorbs rain, silently, without visible change, but with the certainty that something beneath the surface had shifted. You are angry, Dumbledore said. You have every right to be. I made decisions about your life without your consent, and those decisions had consequences I did not foresee. He paused. But I must tell you something, Harry, and I ask that you hear it fully before you respond. I'm listening. There is a prophecy. Made before your birth. It speaks of a child born at the end of July to parents who defied Voldemort 3 times, who would have a power the Dark Lord knows not. Dumbledore's voice was careful, measured, every word chosen with the precision of a man laying bricks. That child is you, Harry. The prophecy is why Voldemort targeted your family. It is why he will continue to target you. And it is why, he spread his hands. It is why I believed you needed to be protected in a way that no ordinary measures could achieve. The room was very quiet. A prophecy, Harry said. Yes, made before I was born, by Professor Trelawney in this very castle, and you've known about this the whole time. Before my parents died, before the doorstep, before any of it. Yes, Harry nodded slowly. The anger was still there, he could feel it, hot and enormous, pressing against his ribs, but it was being channeled now, shaped, directed by the part of his mind that Narcissa had trained and Severus had sharpened. Raw fury was useless. Focused fury was a weapon. What does the prophecy say, exactly? Dumbledore hesitated. Harry saw it, the calculation, the weighing of disclosure versus control, and he stepped on it hard. You can tell me now in this room, in front of everyone who's already involved, Harry said, or I can find it myself. I know where prophecies are kept. Department of Mysteries, Hall of Prophecy. I'm Harry Potter, I can walk in and pick it up off the shelf. The bluff was transparent. He was an 11-year-old in a hospital gown, but the underlying message was real. I will not be managed. Give me the truth or I will take it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he recited, "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." The words settled into the room like stones dropping into water. Ripples spread outward, Narcissa's sharp intake of breath, Draco's whispered obscenity, Lucius's hand tightening on his cane, Severus closing his eyes as though he'd been struck. Harry stood in the center of it and felt nothing. Or rather, he felt everything, the whole catastrophic weight of it, and chose to set it aside, the way you'd set aside a box too heavy to carry, with the intention of coming back for it when you were stronger. "Either must die at the hand of the other," he repeated. "Yes, so it's me or him. Ultimately, yes, and you've known this since before I was born, and your plan was to, what? Raise me in a muggle cupboard until I was ready, send me to Hogwarts, train me up like a soldier, and point me at Voldemort when the time was right." Dumbledore said nothing. The silence was its own answer. "That's not a plan," Harry said. "That's a death sentence with a scholarship attached." Narcissa made a sound, half laugh, half sob. Harry didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Dumbledore, and the headmaster met his gaze, and the two of them existed for a moment in a space that was older and stranger than the room around them, the man who had orchestrated a war and the boy who was destined to finish it. "I don't accept the prophecy," Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Don't accept it. A prophecy is a prediction, not a command. It tells you what someone saw, not what has to happen. Voldemort chose to believe it. He chose to attack my family. He chose to mark me." Harry touched his scar. "Every choice after that is mine, not his, not yours, mine." "Harry, the prophecy is affixed. Nothing is fixed. I've spent my entire life being told who I am by other people. Malfoy, Potter, twin, heir, boy who lived. None of them asked me. None of them let me choose. Well, I'm choosing now. I'll deal with Voldemort, not because a prophecy says I have to, but because he killed my parents and he's going to keep killing until someone stops him. And I have the power to stop him. But I'll do it my way on my terms when I'm ready, not when you decide it's time." Dumbledore stared at him. And something happened to the old man's face, a softening, a shifting, as though a mask he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it was there had slipped, just slightly, and what was underneath was not the chessmaster or the manipulator, but a very old, very tired, very lonely man who had been carrying the weight of the wizarding world for longer than most people had been alive. "You are remarkable," Dumbledore said quietly. "You are nothing like what I expected." "Good. People who live up to expectations are boring." The ghost of a smile crossed Dumbledore's face. It was genuine, the first genuine expression Harry had seen from him. Your mother, Lily, would have said something very similar. The name landed differently than it had before, not as a stranger's legacy or a story in a newspaper, as something personal, a connection. Harry filed it away, not in the box of things too heavy to carry, but in a different place, a warmer one. "We need to discuss practicalities," Severus said, pulling the room back to earth with the gravitational force of someone who had no patience for emotional revelations when operational security was at stake. "Harry's identity is now known to everyone in this room. The question is how far it spreads." "It can't spread," Narcissa said immediately. "If the wizarding world learns that Harry Potter has been living as a Malfoy, Lucius said, and his voice carried the cold edge of a man thinking 3 political moves ahead. "It's a matter of time. Pomfrey has seen his face. The school governors will demand an investigation. The ministry won't touch this if we manage it correctly." "Manage it." "Narcissa, you kidnapped the boy who lived. I saved a child from neglect. The optics are entirely different, and I will shape them before anyone else gets the chance. The optics of placing Harry Potter in a Death Eater's home are complicated, which is why we get ahead of the story, not behind it." They were slipping into the Malfoy mode, the political machinery, the strategic calculation, the instinctive maneuvering that pureblood families ran on like fuel. Harry let them argue for 30 seconds, listening to the shape of the conflict, identifying the pressure points. Then he said, "I'll make the announcement myself." Every voice stopped. "I'm Harry Potter," he said. "It's my identity. It's my story. I decide how it's told." He looked at Narcissa. "You took me because Dumbledore left me somewhere terrible. That's the truth. That's the narrative. A mother's instinct to protect a child that the system failed." He looked at Lucius. "You raised me as your son. Whatever your reasons, whatever your past, you gave me a home and a family. That's also true." He looked at Dumbledore. "And you made a mistake. You trusted a system, Muggle relatives, blood wards, isolation, that would have damaged me. My mother corrected that mistake." You can either acknowledge that publicly or you can fight it, and if you fight it, I will make it very clear to the wizarding world exactly what you plan for me." Dumbledore's eyes narrowed. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Harry. It's a negotiation. I learned from the best." He glanced at Lucius. "Consider it a compliment." Lucius's mouth twitched. It might have been horror, it might have been pride. "Here's what I want," Harry said. "1, I stay at Hogwarts. This is my school, this is where I'm educated, and no one removes me. 2, I remain a member of the Malfoy family, not by law, not by blood, but by choice. Narcissa Malfoy is my mother. Draco Malfoy is my brother. That doesn't change because of a prophecy or a birth certificate. 3, my identity becomes public on my terms. I write the statement, I control the release. No leaks, no ministry press conferences, no profit exclusives. 4, Dumbledore stays out of my personal life, no summonses to the office. No monitoring instruments, no decisions made about me without my knowledge and consent." He paused, let the list settle, then added, "And 5, when the time comes to deal with Voldemort, I do it with the full support of every person in this room. No secrets, no separate agendas, no one playing chess with my life." The room was silent. Morning sunlight slanted through the hospital wing windows, falling across the bed Harry had just vacated, the crumpled blankets, the tray of untouched potions. In the stillness, the terms of a new world order hung in the air like dust motes. Narcissa spoke first. "Agreed, Severus, agreed. Draco, obviously agreed. Was there ever a question?" Lucius was slower. Harry could see the internal war, the politician fighting the father, the strategist fighting the man who had just watched his carefully constructed world disintegrate. But Lucius Malfoy was, above everything else, a survivor. He adapted, he calculated, and he recognized, with the clarity of a man who had spent his life reading power dynamics, that the balance in this room had shifted permanently to the 11-year-old boy in the hospital gown. "Agreed," Lucius said. "With the caveat that I be consulted on any political strategy. The ministry is my territory." "Agreed," Harry said. Every eye turned to Dumbledore. The headmaster sat in his conjured chair, his fingers steepled, his blue eyes moving between the faces around him. Harry watched him calculate, watched the old mind work through scenarios, projections, contingencies. Dumbledore was not accustomed to being outmaneuvered. He was not accustomed to negotiating from anything other than a position of total informational superiority. And he was visibly, profoundly disoriented by the fact that the boy he'd lost a decade ago was standing in front of him, fully formed, fully informed, and completely outside his control. "You are asking me to relinquish oversight of the child upon whom the fate of the wizarding world may depend," Dumbledore said. "I'm asking you to trust me. You are 11, and I've already beaten Voldemort twice. What's your record?" The silence that followed was, Harry thought, possibly the most satisfying silence of his life. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, not with legitimacy, not with the twinkle, not with the grandfatherly performance, with the clear, unguarded eyes of a man who was, perhaps for the first time, seeing another person not as a piece on his board but as a player at his table. "Agreed," Dumbledore said, "with reservations. You can keep your reservations, just keep them to yourself." Dumbledore made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been a laugh. He stood and his height filled the room, tall, ancient, radiating a power that dwarfed everyone else's. But he inclined his head to Harry, and the gesture was not performance, it was acknowledgement. "You are your mother's son," Dumbledore said, "both of them." He looked at Narcissa, and something passed between them, not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of a recognition that two people who had both tried to save the same child might find common ground eventually, somewhere down the line. "I will make arrangements with the ministry. There will be inquiries, questions. The political fallout will be considerable." "I can handle the ministry," Lucius said, and for the first time since entering the room, he sounded like himself, smooth, confident, the political operator engaging with a problem he understood. "I'll handle the press," Narcissa said. "I have contacts at the Prophet. The story breaks on our terms or not at all." "And I," Severus said, with the weary resignation of a man who has realized he's going to spend the next several years managing this particular circus, "will continue to teach potions and pretend that none of this is happening." "You'll continue to train me," Harry corrected. Severus gave him a look that could have stripped paint. "That too." Dumbledore moved to leave. At the door he turned back. "Harry, Professor, the power the Dark Lord knows not, the prophecy's phrasing." Dumbledore's gaze was steady, warm, and for once entirely without agenda. "I spent 10 years wondering what it meant. I considered every form of magic, every discipline, every branch, every theory. I could not identify it. And now," Dumbledore looked at Narcissa, at Draco, at the hand Draco was still holding, refusing to let go. At the family that had been forged not from blood but from choice, built on a lie that had been dismantled and rebuilt into something stronger. "Now I think I know," Dumbledore said, and he left. The fallout was everything they'd anticipated and worse. The story broke 3 days later, not in the Prophet, which Narcissa controlled, but through a leak at St. Mungo's, where one of Madame Pomfrey's routine reports had been filed and intercepted by a junior healer with a cousin at the paper. The headline was apocalyptic. Harry Potter found. The boy who lived raised as Malfoy Air Britain lost its collective mind. The ministry convened an emergency session. The Wisengamot demanded hearings. The Prophet ran 17 articles in 4 days. Owls flooded Hogwarts by the hundreds, from well-wishers, from conspiracy theorists, from people who claimed to be Harry's relatives, from people who wanted to adopt him, from people who wanted to study him, from people who wanted him arrested, pardoned, canonized, or committed. Lucius handled the politics. He was, Harry had to admit, magnificent at it. The imperious defense that had kept him out of Azkaban was child's play compared to the narrative gymnastics required now, but Lucius rose to the occasion with a virtuosity that was almost artistic. Within 48 hours he had reframed the entire story. Narcissa Malfoy, a concerned mother, discovering a wizarding child abandoned by muggle-hating relatives. The Dursleys, conveniently, refused all contact with the magical world and could not contradict this, rescuing him, raising him in a loving home. The fact that Dumbledore had placed the child there in the first place became the scandal, not Narcissa's intervention. It helped that Narcissa was beautiful, articulate, and devastating in front of a camera. Her interview with the Prophet, carefully scripted, emotionally precise, painted a picture of maternal heroism that made 3/4 of Wizarding Britain weep into their morning tea. She described the doorstep, the cold, the thin blanket, the letter pinned to a baby's chest. She cried at exactly the right moment, and the tears were real, and the public swallowed the story whole. Dumbledore, to his credit, did not fight it. Whether this was because he'd agreed to Harry's terms or because he recognized that fighting a sympathetic mother in the court of public opinion was a losing game, the result was the same. The headmaster issued a brief statement acknowledging that mistakes were made in the initial placement and expressing his profound relief that Harry Potter had been raised in a loving home. The ministry wanted custody hearings. Lucius shut that down in a single afternoon, a combination of legal precedent, political favors, and the quietly devastating threat that a full investigation into Harry's placement would reveal exactly how many regulations Dumbledore had violated in 1981. The custody question died on the committee floor, and Harry Potter remained, officially and legally, a ward of the Malfoy family. Harry watched it all from a distance, not disengaged, aware, attentive, tracking every development but deliberately removed from the machinery. This was Narcissa and Lucius's war, fought with tools he understood but didn't wield. His war was different. His war was internal. He spent the days after the announcement walking the castle. Not hiding, he couldn't hide now, not with his real face and his scar and the constant, buzzing awareness that every student he passed was staring at him with something between awe and terror. He walked openly, deliberately, the black-haired, green-eyed boy with the lightning bolt scar, wearing Slytherin robes and the Malfoy name and a face that the wizarding world had been searching for since 1981. The reactions varied. The Gryffindors were split, half of them outraged that their hero had been raised by Slytherins, half of them grudgingly impressed by what he'd done to Voldemort. The Ravenclaws treated it as an intellectual puzzle. The Hufflepuffs were mostly just glad he was alive. The Slytherins closed ranks around him with a possessive loyalty that surprised everyone except Harry, who had spent the last 8 months building exactly the kind of social capital that paid dividends in moments like this. Hermione Granger found him in the library on the 4th day. She sat across from him without asking, opened a book, and said, "I've done some reading on glamour magic. What your mother did shouldn't have been possible." The sustained metamorphic overlay requires a sympathetic magical resonance that can only be achieved through blood adoption ritual spliced with a black family metamorphic charm. Harry said, "I know. You know." Her eyes went wide. "That's NEW. T-level spell theory at minimum, probably beyond. My mother is brilliant, obviously." Hermione paused, and her expression shifted from academic to something warmer, more tentative. "Are you all right? I'm Harry Potter, raised by Malfoys, hunted by Voldemort, and the subject of a prophecy. Define all right." "Fair point." She closed her book. "For what it's worth, I don't think it matters. What doesn't matter? Who your parents were, what name you grew up with, the prophecy, any of it." She met his eyes with the steady, fearless certainty that he was beginning to recognize as her defining quality. "You're you. You were you before the glamour broke, and you're you after. The rest is just context." Harry looked at her, this muggle-born girl with the bushy hair and the too large front teeth, who had no reason to be kind to a Malfoy and every reason to be wary of a Potter, and who had crossed every social line Hogwarts had to offer just to sit across from him and say something honest. "Thanks, Granger, Hermione. Thanks, Hermione." She nodded, opened her book again, and they sat in the library in comfortable silence, while the world outside rearranged itself around the truth. The last day of term arrived with the suddenness that only school years can manage. One moment it was exams and revision and frantic last-minute essays, and the next it was trunks being packed and owls being caged and students streaming toward the Hogwarts Express in a chattering, laughing, summer-hungry flood. Harry stood at the window of his dormitory and looked at the lake. The water was bright with June sunlight, the surface dappled with wind, and somewhere in the depths the giant squid was doing lazy loops, its tentacles catching the light. "You're brooding," Draco said from behind him. "I'm thinking. Same thing with you." Harry turned. Draco was sitting on his bed, his trunk packed, his robes pressed, his hair impeccable. He looked exactly like he'd looked on the first day of term, sharp, composed, unflappable, but his eyes were different. 8 months of revelations and battles and identity crises had put something in them that hadn't been there before, a depth, a knowing, the particular gravity of a boy who had learned that the world was more complicated than his family had told him. "Nervous about going home?" Draco asked. "Nervous about what home means now." Draco stood, crossed to the window, and stood beside Harry. Their reflections appeared in the glass, one white blonde, one black-haired, one Malfoy, one Potter. Standing shoulder to shoulder the way they'd stood since before either of them could remember. "Home means us," Draco said. "You and me, whatever else changes. Your father is my father, and he's going to have to deal with the fact that his sons are a pure-blood aristocrat and the muggle-born raised, half-blood, chosen one celebrity." Draco's mouth twitched. "Christmas dinners will be interesting. I'm not half-blood. Your mother was muggle-born. Your grandmother was a black. Everyone's got something. That's not the same, and you know it. I know it doesn't matter, not to me. Does it matter to you?" Draco was quiet for a moment. The question wasn't casual, it was the question, the real one, the one that everything else orbited. Did blood matter? Did the ideology that Lucius had poured into Draco since birth, the purity, the hierarchy, the belief that some people were worth more than others based on who their parents were, did any of it hold up when the brother you loved turned out to be the son of a muggle-born witch? "No," Draco said. The word was simple and heavy, and it cost him something, not conviction, not integrity, but the comfortable certainty of a worldview he'd inherited without examination. He was giving it up, consciously, deliberately, the way you'd set down a weapon you no longer needed. "It doesn't matter, good, because I wasn't going to stop being your brother either way, and it would have been awkward." Draco shoved him. Harry shoved back. They ended up in a brief, undignified scuffle that knocked Draco's trunk off the bed and sent a shower of socks across the floor, and by the time they disentangled, they were both laughing and the heaviness had broken. "Come on," Harry said. "Train's leaving." They gathered their things. Harry looked around the dormitory one last time. The green-tinted light from the lake, the silver fixtures, the bed where he'd spent his first night staring at the ceiling with the Sorting Hat's words echoing in his skull. He'd arrived as Hadrian Malfoy, a boy wearing someone else's face. He was leaving as Harry Potter, a boy who'd chosen his own. The common room was nearly empty. Most of the Slytherins had already headed to the train, but a few lingered, Blaise Zabini by the fireplace, Pansy Parkinson near the exit, Theodore not reading in a corner. They all looked up when Harry entered. No one spoke for a moment. Then Blaise rose from his chair, crossed the room, and extended his hand. "Good year, Potter." Harry took it. "Good year, Zabini. Try not to almost die next year. It makes the rest of us look bad. No promises." Blaise smiled, his rare, genuine smile, the one that made his face look entirely different, and released Harry's hand. Pansy nodded at him from the doorway, and the nod carried more respect than anything she'd said all year. Nott didn't look up from his book, but he raised one hand in a wave that managed to be both lazy and sincere. Harry walked through the common room and out into the dungeon corridor, and the castle hummed around him, warm, alive, aware. He pressed his hand against the wall as he passed, and the stone was warm, and he could have sworn he felt the castle press back. "See you in September," he thought. The wall hummed. The Hogwarts Express was a chaos of compartments and corridors and students shouting through windows. Harry and Draco found their compartment, the same one they'd shared on the way up 8 months and a lifetime ago, and settled in. Draco took the window seat. Harry took the opposite. Between them on the seat lay the folded copy of that morning's Daily Prophet, the headline visible. Harry Potter to remain with Malfoy family. Ministry drops custody inquiry below it, a photograph of Harry, his real face, caught by a photographer outside the Great Hall 2 days ago. Black hair, green eyes, the scar partially visible, his expression caught mid-turn, half smiling, looking at something off camera. He was wearing Slytherin robes. The caption read, Harry Potter 11 leaving the Great Hall at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where he has just completed his first year as a student in Slytherin House. The compartment door slid open. Hermione stood in the doorway, her trunk floating behind her. Room for one more, she asked. Draco looked at her. She looked back. There was a moment, charged, weighted, the collision of two social worlds that had no business sharing a train compartment, and then Draco moved his bag off the seat. Sit down, Granger. Hermione, sit down, Hermione. She sat. The trunk stowed itself overhead. A moment later, Neville appeared in the corridor, peering in hopefully, his toad clutched to his chest. Is there? Get in here, Longbottom, Draco sighed with the theatrical resignation of a boy who was slowly, painfully learning that his social circle was going to be much more interesting than he'd planned. Neville sat beside Hermione. The compartment was full. 4 students from 3 houses, Slytherin, Gryffindor, who had no business being friends and were becoming them anyway, because an 11-year-old boy had walked into Hogwarts wearing someone else's face and walked out wearing his own, and the world had rearranged itself around him. The whistle blew, the train lurched. And Hogwarts began to slide away, the towers shrinking, the lake glittering, the castle's ancient silhouette receding into the Scottish Highlands like a dream returning to the place where dreams are kept. Harry watched it go. His wand was in his pocket, holly and phoenix feather, still warm, still humming. His scar was on his forehead, visible, undisguised, a mark he'd chosen to wear rather than hide. His brother was beside him, his friends were around him, and ahead, stretching out like a road with no end, was a future that belonged to no one but him. So, Draco said, breaking the silence with the casual precision of someone dropping a stone into still water. What do we do about Voldemort? We get stronger, Harry said. Smarter, better prepared. He's out there, scattered, weak but alive. He'll come back, and when he does, we'll be ready. We, Hermione said. We. Harry looked at each of them. Draco, who had chosen him. Hermione, who had believed him. Neville, who had stood up when standing up was hard. All of us together. I'm not sure I'm qualified to fight the Dark Lord, Neville said. I can barely fight Trevor. He held up the toad, which croaked morosely. You're braver than you think, Neville. People keep saying that. I wish they'd stop. They'll stop when you start believing it. Neville blinked. Then he smiled, a small, surprised, uncertain smile that looked like the first green shoot pushing through hard ground. Okay, together then. The train picked up speed. The countryside blurred, green fields, stone walls, rivers catching the afternoon sun. Harry leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. The wand hummed. The scar ached faintly, a distant reminder of unfinished business. Voldemort was out there. The prophecy was real. The war was coming, but not today. Today was a train ride and a compartment full of people who mattered, and the long golden light of a June afternoon, and the simple, defiant, extraordinary fact of being alive. Harry opened his eyes and looked at Draco. What do you think Mum's making for dinner? Draco grinned. Something elaborate. She stress cooks when the world's ending. The world's not ending. The Daily Prophet would beg to differ. The prophet said I was dead for 10 years. Their track record isn't great. Draco laughed. Hermione rolled her eyes. Neville's toad escaped again, and the compartment descended into the cheerful, ridiculous, deeply human chaos of 4 kids chasing a toad around a train car while the English countryside rolled past the windows and the future barreled toward them like a freight train made of starlight and danger. Harry caught the toad, handed it to Neville, sat back down. He was Harry Potter. He was a Malfoy. He was a Slytherin. He was the boy who lived. He was none of those things and all of them at once, and the world could call him whatever it liked. He knew who he was, not the boy on the doorstep, not the boy in the glamour, not the weapon, the prophecy, the chess piece, just Harry. A boy with green eyes and a lightning bolt scar and a family he'd chosen, heading home to the people who loved him, with the whole burning, beautiful, terrifying future spread out ahead like an open road. He was ready. The train rolled south and the sun was warm and the summer stretched ahead like a promise, and Harry Potter, raised by Malfoys, sorted into Slytherin, forged in fire and lies and love, rode toward whatever came next with his brother at his side and his wand in his pocket and his mother's voice in his heart. Both of them. You did well, Harry, you did well.